Welcome, friends, to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock flavoured podcast. On this show, I welcome Dave back to Derry Toms to talk about some stories that were as formative for him as they were for me back in our teens. Although there were 2 decades or more between us actually experiencing our teens, we trod similar paths in terms of our reading, and reading these stories today, we perhaps still had similar reactions and feelings to the content. We're talking about the Robert E Howard Conan stories, The Phoenix on the Sword, and the Scarlet Citadel. Normally, when we cover a new author, I'd pull the enormous encyclopedia of fantasy off the shelf to test my wrist power, but as this show is pretty lengthy as it is, I'll skip that on this occasion so we can get into it with Dave. Perhaps if we come back to Tugan Bob in the future, I'll give his entry a look. And of course, technically, this is the second time I've looked at Conan, because we have talked about the Tower of the Elephant in the past. Dave also gives us an update on the latest SÖNUS news, and that sounds exciting too. And if you're new to the podcast and haven't checked SÖNUS out, find them on Bandcamp. I will, of course, link to the first 2 albums, Worlds Undreamed Of and Usurper of the Universe, in the show notes. And we'll play the show out with SÖNUS' very own The Hour of the Dragon. As is often the case when reading stories that are close to a century old and written in the febrile atmosphere of Depression-era USA, there are some attitudes and use of language that can be jarring, and we'll talk about some of that along the way. Also, if you don't like your podcasts or podcast host getting political, fair warning. There is plenty of head smashing though, so take heart from that. So sit back on your hard-won throne, demand a flagon of wine to slake your battle thirst, and join us as we talk about Conan the Cimmerian. We're back in Derry Toms, and with me on this occasion, it's Dave. It's Dave's first return for quite a while. Welcome back, Dave.
Heyo, here I am.
So, first part of call. How was your trip to Europe?
It was fantastic. I got to go to France and England. I got to see Mont Saint-Michel, which was absolutely spectacular. I mean, that's like something out of, well, I mean, anything that we'd read here, right? I mean, I think the one in Cornwall was the inspiration for Moidal's Mount in the Coram trilogy, so it was really cool to see, the French version, which just looked like a level out of Dark Souls. It was spectacular.
It's mad, isn't it?
Oh my God, yeah.
We went there years ago for the first time, and when you're driving along that road with all the green grass on the right and you just see it on the horizon, it's just mind-blowing.
Just in the mist, this looming giant thing, and it just gets bigger as you get closer, and you're like, holy shit, I can't believe this actually exists. That was cool. Unfortunately, I had some dodgy bread pudding on the plane over. I got like an hour's sleep and like food poisoning from the flight over. So the first few days, I went to the Louvre, went to the Palace of Versailles, and I must have visited every bathroom in the Louvre, like some of them even twice. It was crazy. So if you ever go there with me, I can point out where the bathrooms are. I'm your guide. If you gotta go, hey, I know you gotta go down that hall and to the left, and there you go. So,
well, you know what? Every day's a school day, especially when you got the shits.
Oh, it was rough, man. Let me tell you, holy crap, literally. But yeah, it was crazy. All the opulence, all the art, all the gilded, Romanesque architecture. You see it, you're in awe, and then you think, this is why they cut these fuckers' heads off. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, that's why every fucker was poor, so they could build that stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, that's definitely where the money went. Oh, yeah.
So I think the second time we went to Mont Saint-Michel, we went across the cars. I think they've changed all the causeway now since the last time we were there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we walked across the causeway, and we got in, and funny enough, Phil was busting for the loo. And we got across the causeway and just got through the bottom gate at the bottom. And of course, to anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, just Google Mont Saint-Michel in France, in Brittany. It's absolutely staggeringly beautiful. It's an incredible place. It is, I'm assuming St. Michael's Mount was a much more recent establishment than Mont Saint-Michel. I'm sure that's the case, because I think Mont Saint-Michel is like 13th century or something. And I think St. Michael's Mount must have taken some kind of inspiration from Mont Saint-Michel, which then, of course, was the inspiration for Moidal's Mount in the Coram stories. But I think Mont Saint-Michel was also the inspiration for Minas Tirith.
I can see that.
Yeah, in the way that the layout works, the spiral road that goes up, just gradually goes up in the multiple layers and levels. Anyway, we got through the gate at the bottom, and Phil went off to the toilet, and I heard like close harmony monk chanting behind me, and I thought, what the hell's that? And I turned round, and they'd come across the causeway. I mean, we hadn't seen them. They must have been behind us, or they all got off a coach 50 yards away from the gate or something. And they all came through in their like, you know, habits. The guy at the front with all of his gold kind of accoutrements, holding a crucifix, and they basically walked slowly up the spiral cobbled road up to the cathedral at the top, and everybody kind of spread to the sides taking photographs. It was really incredible, and Phil missed the entire thing, and because she had to go and find the lavvy. Yeah, that was the second time we went. The first time we went, we realised there were actually hotels on there. Yeah, our intention was always to go back and stay on there for a couple of days, but we just never got round to it, and then we stopped holiday in France and started exploring Scotland and Ireland instead. But we're going to have to go back at some point.
Got to. And have you seen the weird, crazy, like 80s fantasy movie kind of presentation on it that they have there in one of the museums? It's crazy. You go, you sit in, and you know they start this like, it looks like the beginning of Escape from New York, like this like just like green CAD line outline of Mont Saint-Michel, and then like there's this trippy like 70s like, you know, synth music going on, just and like smoke and fog and stuff like that. Now, obviously, it's all in French, as are all the placards. So all the stuff, I wasn't able to learn too much because I don't speak French, unfortunately. But you know, just sitting in that thing, watching this presentation, I'm like, wow. I could imagine Moorcock back in the 70s, you know, checking this out and be like, oh yeah, you know, oh my god. At one point, the best part is they have like a miniature Mont Saint-Michel, and it comes out of the water. There's like a screen, and then below it is the water, so it's like reflecting in this like weird like stone kind of room. It's pretty badass. While all this like really like weird 70s electronic is like playing, it was cool. It was really cool.
That sounds really awesome. I must say, our experiences of France generally are that when it comes to their chateaus and their castles and their monasteries, they have a lot more imagination than we do. That's probably partially down to a couple of things. One is, I suppose, we have the dissolution of the monasteries, so most of ours were knackered anyway, and are just ruins, whereas most of theirs are still there, unless you're in the foothills of the Pyrenees, where everywhere you go, you just see ruined, like old Cathar castles just falling into disrepair on the side of hillsides. It's quite spectacular.
Well, I better
we went up to
Montsegur.
Oh, do it. We went up to Montsegur one day when we were staying in the foothills of the Pyrenees. This absolutely wonderful place, which was I think it was it a converted barn? I can't really remember, but it had a rooftop terrace. And we just went up and sat there every day and drank wine and ate cheese and fresh bread and stared out across a field of frolicking horses next to an old ruined chateau that was lit up with floodlights on a night. It was absolutely beautiful. But it was a 20-minute drive to anywhere from there, and the drives were all round these mountain roads with a 1,000-foot drop on one side with a concrete block every 8 feet, which was supposed to stop cars plummeting off the edge. Because we're English, our driving wheel is on the wrong side of the road. Little grey Citroen vans would come hurtling in the opposite direction at 60 miles an hour and scare the shit out of us. So every time we went anywhere, it was like a white-knuckle ride. Yeah. But we went down to Montsegur, and we parked up in the car park, and we thought, right, it's a big hill, it's a big climb up there, because it was right on top of a fairly hefty escarpment with the most incredible view. Probably the single most incredible and distant view to the horizon I've ever seen because of the altitude. And I mean, we were a lot fitter in those days. You know, I was probably 6 stone lighter back in those days. And this old German couple marched past us going up. Said, "Good morning." Obviously knew we were English. God knows how. We must have English stamped all over us because they said good morning in English. And then coming back, we got about another 20 minutes and they just passed us on the way back down again, this super fit pair of 70-year-old Germans. "Oh, good, hello again." Bastards on the way down. We got to the top and just laid down going, couldn't even appreciate the view for about 10 minutes. But yeah, really, really spectacular place. And that was the last stand of the Cathars there. In fact, I think Iron Maiden did a song called Months Ago.
I was just going to bring it up. That's how I'm familiar with it. And ever since I heard that, I'm like, oh, I got to check that place out. But haven't been there yet. So Steve Harris has written a song about it. That's how historically cool it is, I guess. You know. Metal as hell.
But anyway, we'd better actually get on to what the hell we're talking about here, haven't we? Otherwise we'll be here all night. But what are we do? Oh no, first of all, what's going on with SÖNUS?
Oh my, well, SÖNUS, now a full band. We've been, so basically after the release of Usurper of the Universe back in 2022, I can't believe it's already been 2 years, but time flies.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, crazy, right? Basically since then I put a band together, including my best friend Colin Drake Jaramillo on the drums. We found a bass player, Dave Reno, and then we had a slew of guitar players, which we just tried to find one that was, that fit. So we got one there, Mike Gorman, who's actually an Irishman from Ireland, which is great because Colin and I were both archaeologists, worked in Ireland. So anyway, so we love that connection that we have there. But yeah, so we've been playing gigs basically for the better part of a year and a half. Just getting really solid, really tight as a band, and writing, working on material, stuff like that. And finally, last Sunday, we were in the studio. We recorded 3 new songs. Next Saturday, we have the first mixing session for that, for those 3 songs to get those all finalized. And then there's an additional 4 more that we have for this next album, which, recording as a full band and actually getting to hear that energy, because before it was me doing everything to a click, and then, I did the drums last, and, so that's how that went for those 2 albums. But this is a real band. It's got that, live in the studio kind of sound that I love from the 60s and 70s, we're not really playing to a click. We had it, at the beginning, just to kind of and then first verse, the engineer just turned it off, boom, and we were off and running, and there you go. And it breathes, it moves, it's organic, it sounds powerful. Yeah, sometimes the drums speed up a little bit and we're all trying to keep on, but you know what, I like that. That energy, that early kind of almost AC/DC. Yeah, so it's got that vibe to it, it's got that kind of feel to it. And yeah, I mean, the only overdubs with the guitar or just putting an additional rhythm track, just playing along one take to it. And then I'm gonna do a couple little vocal touch-ups because that's where your insecurities really come out as a singer. You're like, oh, I could do that better. So that's the only thing that I'll be doing for those 3. Next Saturday, and then mixing, and then those will be done, and then on to the next 4 we're working on, and shopping them out to labels and see if we can get any bites. So it's probably still going to be quite a bit before anybody outside of the personal circle hears them. But I'm very, very happy and excited with how they've turned out, and I can't wait to see. Actually, should I say? Yeah. Fuck it, I'll say it. So I've been talking to fantasy painter, book cover extraordinaire Peter and Andrew Jones for the album cover. Nice. So I have a quote on that. I got to save up some money for that one, but I have the layout, the rough layout in Canva, so I kind of know what that's going to be, and it's looking pretty sweet. Yeah, got some other really good artwork for the singles, and and now I just got to sit on it like a dragon, protecting my eggs until it's ready to unleash upon the world. And well,
that's really fucking exciting because Peter Andrew Jones is a fucking legend in the UK, especially to our kind of circles because of the sheer amount of iconic covers that he's responsible for all the stuff that we were into when we were kids. Absolutely. I think he has done album covers as well, hasn't he?
Yeah, I believe so, and if not specifically for the albums, I know people have licensed and stuff, and he's super easy to get a hold of and get in contact. It's been super nice. Honestly, feel bad because I contacted him like a year and a half ago, just kind of hey, how much would it cost theoretically? And he's like, yeah, I'm ready to move in here. I'm like, let me record the album first, but thank you for getting back to me so quickly. So I'll have to reach out to him again and be like, it's finally time.
Yeah. So, well, that's really fucking exciting, and I can't wait to hear it. So, right, what are we on about today? Now, the last time we recorded, In fact, we had a conversation, I think, when we were doing maybe even the Mad God's Amulet, even before we did Sword of the Dawn. We were talking about potentially looking at what we're going to look at today, but ultimately I gave you the choice and said, what, as a break, before we get on and do the rune staff and conclude the history of the rune staff and the first Hawkmoon sequence, what would you want to talk about? And of course, you chose
Conan. Bum, bum,
yeah.
bum, 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 bum.
Yeah, hither came Conan to tread the world under his sandal feet, or whatever the fucking thing is. And we had a long conversation about which stories to cover, and it was like Hour of the Dragon's really long, and we could do 2 hours on 50 pages of Moorcock. So maybe Hour of the Dragon's too long. And ultimately, we settled on the Scarlet Citadel. But then a couple of days ago, we realised that the Scarlet Citadel is pretty much a follow-up to the Phoenix and the Sword. And the Phoenix and the Sword is only about 20 pages long. So I don't know about you, but I jumped on and read the Phoenix and the Sword as well. We're going to talk about those both. I suppose before we crack on, Phoenix and the Sword, published for the first time, Weird Tales, December 1932. Scarlet Citadel, published for the first time, Weird Tales, 1933. Let's just talk about Robert E Howard briefly. I think when it comes to the canon of fantasy writers and pulp writers, some of them are pretty enigmatic and interesting characters, for good or ill. And obviously Lovecraft is probably one of the ones that leaps straight into the conversation when you think about the Weird Tales authors and the foibles of those individuals and how unusual their lives were and some of their opinions were and their lifespan as well. But I think Howard is particularly interesting, isn't he? Because he's almost the polar opposite of Lovecraft. Lovecraft being this strange, studied Anglophile, very, very stiff, very proper, very prim, with some rather alarming opinions on race and genealogy and a lot of other things. Whereas Howard, Cross Plains, Texas, he's probably established himself as almost the preeminent writer of American pulp fiction by the time he's 26 or 27, churning stuff out at an absolutely phenomenal rate whilst living with his mum and dad in Cross Plains. His dad is a local doctor and his mother has tuberculosis and is generally ill most of the time, and he very sadly takes his own life at the age of 30 before he really, really manages to establish himself as what could have been a serious writer of American tales, because those were his ambitions, were to write much more local tales. When did you first come across him?
So, I mean, it started with, the 1982 Conan the Barbarian movie. I just rented that from Blockbuster, probably after playing a bunch of Elder Scrolls Oblivion, and, when I was a kid. So I want to say probably, I might have been like 14, maybe 15. And of course it was a rated R movie, but I snuck that one past my mom. So, yeah, seeing that was, kind of life altering. That was just such a powerful movie, and especially at that age when you're going through puberty and you start getting your testosterone's flooding, you're just like, strength, crush your enemies, man. So I immediately grew my hair long, baby. Yeah, this is what life is about. So I immediately started growing my hair long and lifting a bunch of weights, and and that's been a continuous thing in my life, but so yeah. And then obviously after that, then I watched Conan the Destroyer and was immediately absolutely let down by what a PG cartoon that was compared to this thing, and I was like, oh shit, that sucked. How do I get more of that? I need more of that. And then of course Google. So yeah, obviously, then I discovered the original stories. I discovered the Dark Horse comic books. So I kind of got onto both at about the same time. But of course, being a comic book guy, I think I probably favored reading the Dark Horse comic books first with Kurt Busiek and Cary Nord's original run.
They were fantastic. Their first run was incredible.
Amazing. So, I'd be reading that in, class in high school, reading period. I'd just be getting my Conan comics out. And then, eventually then the Del Rey editions came out, which I'm holding right here, The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian. And this was, of course, the first one that I got. And then that blew my mind and really introduced me to pulp, in total. as a whole, and specifically this story, the Scarlet Citadel. And one of the reasons why I wanted to pick this was because I hadn't read it since I was 15 or 16, and this was probably my introduction to pulp horror, like weird horror, because this story is so weird and so spooky and so just like weird things in the darkness and like kind of like honestly, they have very Lovecraftian. It's in that similar thing, and this story probably more than others makes the case for Conan being in the same universe as the Cthulhu mythos and all that stuff. And I just remember sitting in math class in like the middle of the afternoon reading this because of course I wasn't really paying attention too much in math, don't tell my dad, but reading this and just feeling just that stark terror and horror and just being like, oh my god, like literally like wow. And that's really like one of the most powerful reading experiences I've ever had was reading chapter 3 of the Scarlet Citadel.
The very, very first paragraph of the Scarlet Citadel I can still remember having an impact on me as a teenager. And it wasn't until I reread it for this, because I probably haven't read it for 20 years or more. Same with Phoenix on the Sword. As soon as I read the opening sentence, I was like, that's the one I remember, which is quite serendipitous. That one of the best paragraphs in my mind as a kid for reading of Robert E Howard and reading Conan was that paragraph. But I first came across the Sphere paperback editions, which was the series that comprised the Robert E Howard stories as edited and often extensively rewritten by Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter, and the pastiche novels that filled in some of the blanks. Because, of course, when it comes to Phoenix on the Sword, Scarlet Citadel, they're two of the 3 chronological narrative last stories, with the Hour of the Dragon, the big long one, being the final one. And then beyond that, I think the only one I can remember where there was a story about an older Conan was Conan of the Isles, which was a Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter one where he's got grey hair on the cover and is a much older king. So to me as a kid, a lot of it all blended in, and I didn't really recognise the difference between the pastiche stuff and the Howard stuff, although there was probably stuff I enjoyed more than other stuff, But when it came to getting those books off Pops, most books we got off Pops, if it was Westerns, my sister took them, so she took all the JT Eds, and she was really into all the pulp Westerns. I was into the pulp sci-fi and fantasy, but we fought over the Sphere Conan novels because she loved them as well. And I don't have any of them, sadly, anymore, but I do occasionally pick them up. But that Sphere run eventually later included the Carl Edward Wagner, the Road of Kings, the Poole Adamson, Conan the Rebel, the Andrew J. Offutt stories, which I don't remember really getting into at all, like the Sword of Skelos, the Bjorn Nyberg stories. So it went on and on and on, that run. But of course it had the Frank Frazetta covers. And Frank Frazetta and Melvin, I think, were the artists who did the majority of those covers. So to a 13-year-old in 1985, they were like, I was looking at my Moorcock, I was looking at my Sven Hassel novels, and I was looking at Conan Sphere novels. But we're now in a position, of course, with the Del Rey editions and with various other editions where we've now got the original Robert E Howard manuscript-based versions, which, with some mild editing for various mistakes and other bits and pieces, we don't have to worry about the Sprague de Camp rewritten or edited versions now. So my reading today is coming from the Fantasy Masterworks edition, Volume 2. I was hoping that I'd be able to pull out my Berkeley Putnam beautiful 1970s Frank Frazetta jacketed Carl Edward Wagner edited versions, because I think he was the first guy who came along and said, you know what, I don't want to read the Sprague de Camp versions, I want to make an agreement with the Howard property and actually re-edit based upon the original manuscripts. But for some reason, I think there's 3 stories that never made it into either of those volumes for some kind of rights wrangle issues, one of them being the Scarlet Citadel. So as a result, I pulled this off the shelf, but that's fine. It's a perfectly tidy and nice edition. So yeah, and it's not got a Frazetta cover, but you know what? The cover's okay. It's Conan and the big snake from Sather, the serpent. Even though I don't think that actually happens, because he doesn't actually physically end up fighting the snake, does he?
Nope.
But we'll get to that. We'll get to that. I am going to kick off with the Phoenix and the Sword.
Let's do it.
once again, it does beg the question, is Howard one of the all-time greatest at opening paragraphs to stories? It's got to be up there, hasn't he? Because this opens... Over shadowy spires and gleaming towers lay the ghostly darkness and silence that runs before dawn. Into a dim alley, one of a veritable labyrinth of mysterious winding ways, 4 masked figures came hurriedly from a door, which a dusky hand furtively opened. They spoke not, but went swiftly into the gloom, cloaks wrapped closely about them. As silently as the ghosts of murdered men, they disappeared in the darkness. Behind them, a sardonic countenance was framed in the partly opened door. A pair of evil eyes glittered malevolently in the gloom. Now, that's pretty much a perfect opening paragraph, isn't it? Straight away, it establishes place, tone, atmosphere, sets up a mystery, a mysterious antagonist, just in one short paragraph. It's absolutely dripping with flavour. It's fucking wonderful. And straight away, I want to know, who are these mysterious dudes? What are they up to? What dark task are they going to? And who's this guy who's watching them? It's absolutely terrific. And it carries on, it says, "Go into the night, creatures of the night," a voice mocked. "Oh, fools, your doom hounds your heels like a blind dog, and you know it." The speaker closed the door and bolted it, then turned and went up the corridor, candle in hand. He was a sombre giant, whose dusky skin revealed his Stygian blood. He came into an inner chamber where a tall, lean man in worn velvet lounged like a great lazy cat on a silken couch, sipping wine from a huge golden goblet. "Well, Ascalante," said the Stygian, setting down the candle, "your dupes have slunk into the streets like rats from their burrows. You work with strange tools." "Tools?" replied Ascalante. "Why, they consider me that. For months now, ever since the rebel force summoned me from the southern desert, I have been living in the very heart of my enemies, hiding by day in this obscure house, skulking through dark alleys and darker corridors at night, and I have accomplished what these rebellious nobles could not, working through them, and through other agents, many of whom have never seen my face. I have honeycombed the empire with sedition and unrest. In short, I, working in the shadows, have paved the downfall of the king who sits throned in the sun. By Mitra, I was a statesman before I was an outlaw." Yeah. "And these dupes who deem themselves your masters, they will continue to think that I serve them until our present task is completed. Who are they to match wits with Ascalante, Volmana, the dwarfish count of Caraban, Gromel, the giant commander of the Black Legion, Dion, the fat baron of Attalus, Rinaldo, the hair-brained minstrel? I am the force which has welded together the steel in each, and by the claying each, I will crush them when the time comes. But that lies in the future. Tonight, the king dies." Oh, that's good stuff. The build continues. You got a layer of political intrigue is added. We find out who the major players are. The king is as yet unnamed. And as I said, it's a long time since I've read this, maybe 30 years or more. And what leapt at me when I read that, apart from how tasty it all is, and how the prose is efficient and deeply flavourful and evocative, and how we know that Moorcock was inspired by and indebted to Howard, the opening scene of the very first Elric tale, The Dreaming City, is basically this, inverted.
Yep.
And when we read The Dreaming City, when we did it for our very first episode, I wish I'd read this round about the same time, because Elric and the Counts and the Sea Lords are the plotters. Here we're meeting the chief plotter, Ascalante, who's in league with the mysterious Stygian to bring down the king by manipulating the rebel four, the king being Conan himself. And I think it's really easy to forget that this was how the tales of Conan began, and subsequently Howard would drop new episodes in that were scattered all across Conan's lifetime, with no attempt to really forge any kind of definitive narrative order. In fact, in his later exchanges with Lovecraft, he refers to a couple of keen readers of weird tales who wrote to him. One was an engineer, I think, who really, really loved his stories, wrote to him to suggest a chronology. And his response was essentially, if a guy in a bar is recounting his escapades over the years, you don't get them in a tight narrative order. You get them as they occur to him, and that's how he was writing the stories. So he didn't give a shit about chronology or lore. Well, lore, maybe he did, because he was building a world. And I think when it comes to the world building in the Conan stories, it is pretty tight, isn't it?
It really is. There's a lot. I mean, it goes back to, there's prehistories and all this kind of stuff, and especially in Scarlet Citadel, we'll get to later, like, you hear the sorcerer Peleus kind of recounting, and that's kind of, this goes back to sort of Howard's entire thing, which is, the rise and fall of civilizations into barbarism and this kind of continuous, cycle that goes around, and that, these unnumbered aeons, civilizations have risen and fallen and all this kind of stuff. So there's all these, basically this world is built on the bones, or our world is built on the bones of this world, and this world's built on the bones of the earlier Atlantean world, which, King Cole comes from. And this story, Phoenix on the Sword, is basically like a rewrite, a touch-up of By This Axe I Rule, which was originally like a King Cole story, which is also super interesting. And there's one line here I really want to point out. He says, "By Mitra I was a statesman before I was an outlaw." And it's interesting because later on we'll have Conan say, "By Crom, I was a man before I was a king," and that's his. That's so that's something that I just kind of noticed right here, because he says that in various ways a number of times throughout the stories, especially when he's a king. So that kind of stuck out to me there.
Yeah, and you do have that juxtaposition, don't you? Because Conan always refers to the fact that he is at heart, a countryman, a primitive, a barbarian, whatever we want to call it. And his response to things like magic and all that stuff, he kind of reverts almost to the primitive, doesn't he? There's some great passages in these two stories where sorcery comes into play, where basically he pretty much shits his pants. And it's quite plain, but because he's Conan, the fact that he's shit in his pants just steals him to, come out on top of whatever scenario he's in. But he genuinely gets terrified by things. And that's another thing about these stories, where I think the book covers the Conan the Barbarian stories, not so much the Dark Horse stories, because there are some great frames of artwork, especially by Thomas Giorello, where Conan is beat up and is bloody and battered. But those old Frazetta covers and the Conan the Barbarian stories, you always got a sense he was invulnerable.
Yeah.
Whereas in these two stories, he gets the shit beaten out of him multiple times, and he's a real mess. He's a real mess, and he comes very, very close to death. And so we've got Ascalante is in this Elric position here, and you could argue that just as Elric manipulated the Sea Lords of the Young Kingdoms to attack Cimmerian, so we've got this situation where Ascalante is essentially manipulating the Rebel Four, as they're called, because he's got this plan, he's got this, the Rebel Four who hate Conan, the fact that he's a commoner come to the throne, which Conan often refers to, and you've got Ascalante as the flip side of that. He's a noble who's been reduced to being a bum and a rebel, and it really, really, really boils his piss. And we have this other character introduced, the mysterious Stygian, who of course is Thothamon. Thothamon of the Ring. And this ring is lost to him. And so he's the slave of Ascalante, and Ascalante has like a hex over Thothamon, a form of dark ritual that the Stygian is terrified of because, I don't know, I can't remember what it is. It gave some dude in the hills a papyrus with Thothamon's name on it or something, and something really, really bad could happen. So he's got this leverage over the Stygian sorcerer. And as the plan begins, Ascalante is basically just going to use Stygian potions to take down the other plotters and take the throne of Aquilonia for himself in the end anyway. So it's plots within plots, everybody's a traitor, everybody's a dickhead, and you've got this wonderful, tight, 4-page setup that's as tight as you could wish for. Ascalante is obviously a rotter, Thothamon's his slave, he's also a rotter, but he's also got a secondary motivation to escape from Ascalante, so there's plenty going on. And again, I'm thinking back to 60s Elric and how Moorcock was inspired by all this stuff, because he's writing this stuff in the early 60s when he's in his early 20s himself, probably even younger than Robert E Howard was when he was writing these stories. And he inverts some of this again with Theleb Kana, because you've got Theleb Kana not in the Scarlet Citadel, the singing Citadel. Okay, it sings obviously, but Theleb Kana is also introduced as being in the thrall of another. But in that case, he's not a literal slave, he's just love-smitten and obsessed with Queen Yashana. But you've got a very, very similar setup, but once again, inverted and changed around a little bit, to Moorcock's needs and tastes. But on Thothamon, in the original Pure Howard stories, I think he only appears in 3. This, The God in the Bowl, and The Hour of the Dragon. But in a way, unlike the sorcerer in the Scarlet Citadel, who we'll get to, Thothamon's almost tangential because he and Conan never really seem to cross paths, but his actions always have a big bearing on Conan's current predicament at any given time. But then in the Marvel comics and the fix-ups and the pastiches, he's a mustache-twirling villain who's always around somewhere, and they basically turn him into Conan's arch-enemy.
Yeah.
And he's there all the time. All the time. But I didn't pick up on it until recently, but I rewatched Conan the Destroyer for the first time in quite a while.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't like Conan the Destroyer when I first saw it. It was such a letdown after Conan the Barbarian, but I've grown to like it over the years.
For what it is
and even though it's PG-13, it's got some good swordplay in it. Yeah, it's an adventure movie. It is a movie of the comic, isn't it? And you can tell that because it's based on a script by Roy Thomas, isn't it?
Yeah, and Jerry Conway, I think, too. Yeah, so, you get that flavor of, like, the normal kind of, like, monthly 70s, like, Conan series. Definitely not the Savage Sword, because, that's where the good stuff was. But, the typical kind of Marvel comic stand version of Conan, that is a good adaptation of that for that movie, yeah.
Yeah, he never wears clothes, he never wears armour, he's always in a fairy nappy. The classic Conan image, I suppose.
Oh, yeah.
But interesting thing about Conan the Destroyer, and I don't think I ever really clocked it until the last time I watched it, but the secondary villain in that is Thoth-Amon.
Yeah.
But of course, he's nothing like the comics, because...
Yeah.
Sorry, nothing like the books, because Stygian in the books is coded Egyptian, really, isn't it? Because they all worship Set. One of the weird things about not weird. One of the things about Hyboria is all of the places in Hyboria are like coded versions of some real version of old Europe.
Howard wanted to make like a historical, fiction and stuff like that, but he didn't want to be beholden to facts and timelines and all that stuff. So that's the kind of the beauty of Conan's world. You get like the greatest hits of all like the coolest, brutalist, medieval, pre-medieval, ancient world cultures around. So that's
and some of it's pretty on the nose as well, isn't it? Like you got a nation called Corinthia.
Yeah.
Cimmeria, which I was always happy about as a kid. In the Sphere paperbacks, not only did you get a map of Hyboria, but it was overlaid over a map of Europe in the front.
Oh well.
And of course you've got Cimmeria. Yeah, you've got Cimmerian in the north. You've got Vanaheim and the other one north of it, which are like the Nordic Scandinavian countries. And Cimmeria always overlaid Ireland and the north of England and Lower Scotland. Yep. And then you had the Pictic wilderness, which kind of banded round the very top of Scotland and around the rest of Ireland. So I was always very happy that where we are, we were just in the fringes, lower fringes of Cimmeria above the Bossonian Marches or whatever it was. So I was like, yeah, cool, man. Yeah, we're Cimmerian. I can live with that. But yeah, so Thoth-Amon's supposed to be Stygian, but in Conan the Destroyer, he's played by British wrestler turned stuntman and actor Pat Roach, who's the least Egyptian person you could possibly think of.
Absolutely. But at least we also get a crazy 80s costume practical effect Thak from Rogues in the House, the giant ape man monster with the red cloak. And then you get that great scene where he's just swinging Conan around, which has been the basis of some pretty hilarious memes throughout the years.
Yeah, so he does all his wrestling moves, and he does the swing, the big swing. I think my favourite meme of that is the one that's mixed with Kate Winslet from Titanic.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Which is kind of wonderful. Yeah, we've got the coding of the countries. It's all good stuff. So we've got this idea that really Hyboria it can be any version of medieval, almost up to pre-Renaissance Europe, I guess. When you get the knights, the way the knights are described, they're very much like 13th, 14th, maybe even 15th century, just pre-gunpowder, I suppose, for a lot of it. There's no cannons. It's all still very much pre-gunpowder. But it makes for good stuff. And then, of course, we get our introduction to Conan, which is striking, I think, for a couple of reasons. Let's have a look. So it says, the room was large and ornate with rich tapestries on the polished panelled walls, deep rugs on the ivory floor, and the lofty ceiling adorned with intricate carvings and silver scrollwork. Behind an ivory, gold-inlaid writing table sat a man whose broad shoulders and sun-browned skin seemed out of place among those luxuriant surroundings. He seemed more a part of the sun, and winds, and high places of the outlands. His slightest movement spoke of steel spring muscles knit to a keen brain with the coordination of a born fighting man. There was nothing deliberate or measured about his actions. Either he was perfectly at rest, still as a bronze statue, or else he was in motion, not with the jerky quickness of overtense nerves, but with a cat-like speed that blurred the sight which tried to follow him. His garments were of rich fabric, but simply made. He wore no ring or ornaments, but his square-cut black mane was confined merely by a cloth of silver band about his head. Now he laid down the golden stylus with which he had been laboriously scrawling on waxed papyrus, rested his chin on his fist, and fixed his smouldering blue eyes enviously on the man who stood before him. This person was occupied in his own affairs at the moment, for he was taking up the laces of his gold-chased armour and abstractly whistling, a rather unconventional performance considering that he was in the presence of a king. So that's a really interesting introduction, because he's not about to rob a temple, he's not in a tavern, he's not on a battlefield. He's at a desk with a pen doing cartography on a big papyrus and mulling over his situation as the King of Aquilonia and having a conversation with his buddy Prospero, who's, I think Prospero he comes back as the Scarlet Citadel, doesn't he, in the late cavalry charge. Prospero's a good bloke and a mate. And it's a fantastic introduction. We did do a Conan story, I think, our first half dozen episodes when we did the very first birthday special. Phil and I read the Tower of the Elephant in Whitby. And in that is a young kid. He's still a teenager. It's still a fantastic introduction, but it just goes to show the breadth of this character. Now we've got Conan, who is a man of letters, is politically savvy, something that's entirely lost in the idea of Conan the Barbarian and not really helped by the film or comics, is that by this stage in his life, he's fiercely intelligent, probably speaks and writes multiple languages, and he's a fucking savvy dude. Yeah. And this is what you get straight away in the very first story. I really dig it. And because it's such a long time since I've read it, and because I don't think the Dark Horse comics, I mean, Kurt Busiek and Carrie Nord moved on and other writers came in. I don't think they ever... Obviously, we've got the King Conan Dark Horse adaptations, and we've got the Scarlet Citadel. I know you've got yours there and I've got mine here. But I bought those and never read them. They've been on the shelf for years. And funnily enough, I looked one of them up on Amazon the other day, and someone's trying to sell it. It's 1,200 quid.
Oh, yeah.
Believe it or not.
Once they lost the license and stopped printing all that Dark Horse material, those prices they skyrocketed. Because I tried to get, they released like a lot of like the basically Dark Horse released the entirety of their Conan run in these big omnibuses. But then Marvel got it, and then Marvel also released the entirety of the Dark Horse run in big omnibuses. So it was like, okay, well, who do you want to buy it from? And so for a time, at one point, there were two versions of the exact same run of comics from two different publishers, all available, vying for the same shelf space. So that was kind of weird.
Are those stories reprinted in the big Marvel hardback omnibuses, the big, huge ones?
They were. I believe that Marvel got through all of the Dark Horse run. I couldn't tell you that off the top of my head for sure, but now of course Marvel has also lost the publishing rights because what they were doing wasn't really all that cool. So now Heroic Signatures, which is the company that owns the Conan IP, they're doing their own run, which I also of course have all of so far. I mean, here's the Savage Sword of Conan. I mean, the cover is amazing, and that has actually been pretty good. They got one of the writers who did the better stories in the Marvel version to basically do this series here without the, I'm sure, Marvel kind of standards of content standards and that kind of stuff. So it's good. You get the blood, you get the nudity, you get the all that kind of stuff. So it's been pretty cool. I've been digging it so far.
Is that writer Jim Zub? Jim Zub. Yeah.
And beautiful art by Rob Delatorre, who basically kind of does like his take on like a John Buscema, which my own personal taste, like for the look of Conan, it's not so much John Buscema. I think that sort of, he's always in the furry loincloth with and then they have the movie, the 1982 movie Sword also comes in here too. So you get these kind of like very popular media takes on Conan, and like I like that, but it's also it's not Howard's Conan. I think that the Dark Horse version did a much better job of showing Conan actually will wear armor and clothing like a normal person. He's not just run around the world in a fuzzy loincloth all the time. So I kind of wish that there was a bit more of that in a lot of these. Yeah,
our friend Dave Dempster was trying to sell me on the Jim Zub ones the other day, and I think I collected all the Dark Horse omnibuses. I think I got them right up until the last one, but I never read any of the Marvel ones when they got the license, and I've not picked up on any of the more recent ones either. So I looked them up, and one of the covers was Conan in the mouth of a T-Rex, with a hot babe in the mouth of a T-Rex holding it up. I was like, man. Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, no.
Andy, don't even get me started on Savage Avengers when Conan gets sucked into the present of the Marvel universe. And he's eating with Doctor Doom, and yeah, no, it happens. It's kind of fun. Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, you actually have the What If Conan Walked the Earth Today. That's amazing.
Yeah. My mate Rich sent me it for my birthday a couple of years ago, so thanks, Rich. Yeah, True Believers 1, What If Conan the Barbarian Walks the Earth Today? At last, the most most requested, longest awaited, and most controversial tale ever of the world's most savage hero. And for people who are listening and obviously can't see this, the cover is Conan and a hot babe in what looks like flared jeans and a striped crop top with red hair, but Conan has got his sword and his fairy nappy, and there's a light on him. There's a Star Wars poster on the wall to the right of this brick wall, and there are people aiming revolvers at him, and there's a trash can and a fire hydrant in the foreground. So yeah, crazy things went on in the world of Marvel Conan. Yeah, but yeah, anyway, fitness on the sword. He's hanging out with his chief of the guard, Prospero, who seems like a solid dude, but they're both wise to the threats around, but they have no specific handle on who's involved and what the plotters have in mind. So the tension is established quite quickly and quite nicely. And next up we get a chapter with Thothamon and more insight into his predicament. And he's with Dion, the fat, arrogant noble who will be installed as king of part of the plot. But Thothamon, I love this chapter, takes a moment to try and appeal to Dion to save him from the yoke of Ascalante. I say a moment, he bangs on for a whole page about how hard done by he is, but it's a rage book with Ascalante, how Ascalante is a massive knobhead, and how Dion should take him on so Ascalante doesn't do them both in because he's a treacherous swine and is planning to poison them all. And it's great, but it's even better because Dion is such a self-obsessed Burke, he doesn't pay any attention to anything Thothamon's saying because he just doesn't listen to underlings or even acknowledge them until Thothamon mentions his ring. And at this point, Dion starts waffling about how he got a lucky ring, which was stolen from a southern sorcerer. Oh, what a coincidence. It turns out to be Thothamon's ring. Good Lord, how could that even happen? So we've got this whole thing with a ring of power, an obsession over it. And it's funny, it's a real fantasy trope, isn't it? The Ring of Power. And Thothamon's behaviour when because he stabs Dion to death brutally and takes his ring back and smears it in blood and holds it and cradles it, like bent over it, talking to it, obsessed. It's like, oh, if anybody's thinking, boring fantasy tropes or Tolkien 101, this predates The Hobbit by 5 years. So yeah, take that.
Well, and then the Nibelungen lead, the saga of the Norse saga of the magical rings. I mean, that's, thousands of years. So there you go.
I was going to say the ring thing goes way back to Norse mythology.
Sorry,
but this
everybody.
is getting it in there in popular fiction. You've already pointed out that this was a rewrite of a cold story that got rejected by the pulps in 1929, I think. So Howard rewrote this a couple of years later, added in the magic elements, added in Thothamon, added in the ring, and it was published in 1932, and the rest is history. But now he's got his restored power. Thothamon uses his slain victim to cast a crazy blood spell and summon a dark shade creature and gives it an order that he be avenged upon Ascalante. And because this is only like a very short 20-something pages of 5 chapters, that will probably come in really, really handy a couple of pages down the line at some specific point. So, back at the palace, Conan is slumbering and dreaming. Alone in the great sleeping chamber with its high golden dome, King Conan slumbered and dreamed. Through swirling grey mists he heard a curious call, faint and far, and though he did not understand it, it seemed not within his power to ignore it. Sword in hand, he went through the grey mist as a man might walk through clouds, and the voice grew more distinct as he proceeded until he understood the word it spoke. It was his own name that was being called across the gulfs of space and time. Now the mist grew lighter, and he saw that he was in a great dark corridor that seemed to be cut in solid black stone. It was unlighted, but by some magic he could see plainly. The floor, ceiling, and walls were highly polished and gleamed dully, and they were carved with the figures of ancient heroes and half-forgotten gods. He shuddered to see vast shadowy outlines of the nameless Old Ones, and he knew somehow that mortal feet had not traversed the corridor for centuries. So very frequently we keep going back to these really kind of mystical, weird tales, Lovecraftian, Clark Ashton Smith style interludes, which are quite cool. But I don't think that actually happens very often in the later Conan books. They're a lot more grounded, aren't they?
Yeah, especially these kind of dream quests. This is definitely more like something that you would find in the Cole stories. The Cole stories are very much like he's philosophical. He's contemplating weird things, the nature of reality. Strange things happen. It's like he'll stare into like the mirrors of Tizun Foon and have all these visions of the primordial earth and all this kind of stuff. So this is definitely, I think, like a remnant of Cole before Howard kind of really solidified what the Conan stories were going to be, or as he was establishing that.
Yeah. It turns out that he bumps into somebody down here. He came upon a wide star carved in the solid rock, and the sides of the shaft were adorned with esoteric symbols so ancient and horrific that King Conan's skin crawled. The steps were carven, each with the abhorrent figure of the old serpent set, so that each step he planted his heel on the head of a snake, as it was intended from old times, but he was none the less at ease for all that. But the voice called him on, and at last, in darkness that would have been impenetrable to his material eyes, he came into a strange crypt and saw a vague, white-bearded figure sitting on a tomb. Conan's hair rose up and he grasped his sword, but the figure spoke in sepulchral tones. "O man, do you know me?"
"Not I, by Crom."
"Man," said the ancient, "I am Epimetheus."
"But Epimetheus the sage has been dead for 1,500 years.
"Hearken. As a pebble cast into a dark lake sends ripples to the further shores, happenings in the unseen world have broken like waves on my slumber. I have marked you well, Conan of Cimmeria, and the stamp of mighty happenings and great deeds is upon you. But dooms are loose in the land, against which your sword cannot aid you."
"You speak in riddles. Let me see my foe, and I'll cleave his skull to the teeth."
"Loose your barbarian fury against your foes of flesh and blood. It is not against men I must shield you. There are dark worlds barely guessed by man, wherein formless monsters stalk, fiends which may be drawn from the outer voids to take material shape and rend and devour at the bidding of evil magicians. There is a serpent in your house, O king, an adder in your kingdom, come up from Stygia, with the dark wisdom of the shadows in his murky soul. As a sleeping man dreams of the serpent which crawls near him, I have felt the foul presence of Set's neophyte. He is drunk with terrible power, and the blows he strikes at the enemy may well bring down the kingdom. I have called you to me to give you a weapon against him and this hell-hound pack."
"But why? Men say you sleep in the black heart of Golamira, whence you send forth your ghost on unseen wings to aid Aquilonia in times of need. But I am an outlander and a barbarian."
"Peace. Your destiny is one with Aquilonia. Gigantic happenings are forming in the web and the womb of fate, and a blood-mad sorcerer shall not stand in the path of imperial destiny. Ages ago Set coiled about the world like a python about its prey. All my life, which was as the lives of 3 common men, I fought him. I drove him into the shadows of the mysterious south, but in dark Stygia men still worship him, who to us is the archdemon. As I fought Set, I fight his worshippers and his votaries and his acolytes. Hold out your sword." So Epimetheus scratches the sigil of the phoenix on Conan's sword, and bingo! 15-year-old ghost that doesn't fancy Stygian interference, and so grants Conan the sigil of the phoenix. Conan gets a magic item. I don't think that happens very often either, does it?
Never.
So you've got this weird thing here where you've got ghostly destiny, you've got things being set on a path, all of which is really, really common in modern fantasy storytelling, but is really, really unusual for a Conan story when we start to read the rest of them. Because I think, does he get magic swords and meet ghosts and shit very often?
No, really not at all. And I mean, especially when we start getting into Scarlet Citadel, he's very accepting of something which I think normally in later tales and what's later been established he would be cursing and hacking at without even a thought. But we'll get to that.
Yeah. In my memory, in the Howard tales, they always tend to be more grounded. I mean, you've got the Tower of the Elephant, which has the tragic alien beast, but it's a tragic alien beast. It's not magic. It's not really supernatural. You've got other tales have grim monstrosities, and you have the evil ritual side. But this is good shit. But it is quite unusual for Conan when you think about the breadth of Conan stories. But what made me laugh was it turns out the sword is a bit flimsy. Because the very first chance he gets to it, well, the ghost sends Conan back to the waking world with a warning, just in time for the conspirators to arrive, and they've got a traitor officer in Conan's Black Guard. Should point out at this point, the Black Guard aren't black, they just wear black armour, but we do get Black Guard in the Scarlet Citadel who are black, but we'll get to that. So they've dismissed his security details, so the conspirators expect to find the king in bed, but unfortunately for them, they break down the door, he's up and about, he's half-armoured, and he's waiting, and we get what is a traditionally cracking Robert E Howard action scene, violent, breathless, action-packed, visceral in a way, again, that the comics and Frazetta covers miss, I think, because the descriptions of Conan being beat up and bashed, and at one point, I think it says something along the lines of, he says through battered and smashed lips. You know, it's a cracking scene. There's a great description of Conan not being a defensive fighter and just instinctively taking the fury out on everything in front of him, which is wonderful. And his first action is to bust some dude's helmet so hard, he breaks his newly decorated magic sword in half. Which I laughed out loud at. It's so Conan. It's brilliant. So he just grabs an axe off the wall and continues to lay around him and smash everybody to bits. We always have that idea of Conan that he's on top of a mound of corpses, seemingly immune. But he's sustaining multiple wounds. There's that wonderful bit of the fight that's pausing the fight where the conspirators realise that a lot of them are going to die, and they have to take a moment to get their heads around the fact that this isn't going how they wanted it to go. And even if they do kill him, lots of them are going to die. And he says through smashed and bloody lips, "Who's next to die?" Yeah, boy. Fucking metal as fuck.
Hell yeah.
And it does get pretty hairy for him, doesn't it? Because Ascalante has the upper hand. But fortunately, it's a short story, and we already know there's a beastie around. Thothamon's shared beast arrives and eats Ascalante's face. But not before terrifying him with its horrific visage from beyond time, which again is all quite Lovecraftian. But Conan has to fight it too, but fortunately his broken sword still slays it, because he managed to grab that off the floor, thanks to the Phoenix sigil, and having heard the ruckus, the Blackguard arrives to take over the fight. And let's just quickly read to the end of the story, so the last couple of pages.
"Wine!"
gasped the king from the couch where they had lain him. They put a goblet to his bloody lips, and he drank like a man half dead of thirst.
"Good. Slaying is cursed dry work."
They had staunched the flow of blood, and the innate vitality of the barbarian was asserting itself.
"See first to the dagger wound in my side. Ronaldo wrote me a deathly song there, and Keane was the stylus."
We should have hanged him long ago," gibbered Publius. "No good can come of poets. Who is this?" He nervously touched Ascalante's body with his sandaled toe. "By Mitra!" ejaculated the commander. "It is Ascalante, once Count of Thun. What devil's work brought him up from his desert haunts?" "But why does he stare so?" whispered Publius, drawing away, his own eyes wide and a peculiar pricking amongst the short hairs at the back of his fat neck. The others fell silent as they gazed at the dead outlaw.
"Had you seen what he and I saw, you had not wondered. Blast your own gaze by looking at—" He stopped short, his mouth gaping, his finger pointing fruitlessly where the monster had died. Only the bare floor met his eyes. "Crom! The thing's melted back into the foulness which bore it."
"The king is delirious," whispered a noble. Conan heard and swore with barbaric oaths.
"By Bad Morrigan Maka and the Main, I am sane." It was like a cross between a Stygian mummy and a baboon. It came through the door, and Ascalante's rogues fled before it. It slew Ascalante, who was about to run me through. Then it came upon me, and I slew it. How, I know not, for my axe glanced from it as from a rock. But I think that the sage Epimetheus had a hand in it.
Hark, how he names Epimetheus, dead for 1,500 years, they whispered to each other.
"By Ymir! This night I talked with Epimetheus. He called to me in my dreams, and I walked down a black stone corridor carved with old gods to a stone chair on the steps of which were the outlines of Set, until I came to a crypt and a tomb with a phoenix carved on it."
"In Mitra's name, Lord King, be silent!" It was the high priest of Mitra who cried out, and his countenance was shaken. Conan threw up his head like a lion, tossing back its mane, and his voice was thick with the growl of the angry lion.
"Am I a slave to shut my mouth at your command?"
Nay, nay, my lord. The high priest was trembling, but not through fear of the royal wrath. I meant no offence. He bent his head close to the king and spoke in a whisper that carried only to Conan's ears. My lord, this is a matter beyond human understanding. Only the inner circle of the priestcraft know of the black stone corridor, carved in the black heart of Mount Golomira by unknown hands, or of the phoenix-guarded tomb where Epimetheus was laid to rest 1,500 years ago, and since that time no living man has entered it, for his chosen priests, having placed the sage in the crypt, blocked up the outer entrance of the corridor so that no man could find it, and today not even the high priests know where it is. Only by word of mouth handed down by the high priest to the chosen few, and jealously guarded, does the inner circle of Mitra's acolytes know of the resting place of Epimetheus in the black heart of Golomira. It is one of the mysteries on which Mitra's cult stands.
I cannot say by what magic Epimetheus brought me to him, but I talked with him, and he made a mark on my sword. Why that mark made it deadly to demons, or what magic lay behind the mark, I know not. But though the blade broke on Grommel's helmet, yet the fragment was long enough to kill the horror.
Let me see your sword, whispered the high priest from a throat gone suddenly dry. Conan held the broken weapon, and the high priest cried out and fell to his knees. Mitra guard us against the powers of darkness, he gasped. The king has indeed talked with Epimetheus this night, and there on the sword is the secret sign none might make but him, the emblem of the immortal phoenix which broods forever over his tomb. A candle! Quick! Look again at the spot where the king said the goblin died. It lay in the shade of a broken screen. They threw the screen aside and bathed the floor in a flood of candlelight, and a shuddering silence fell over the people as they looked. Then some fell on their knees, calling on Mitra, and some fled screaming from the chamber. There on the floor where the monster had died there lay, like a tangible shadow, a broad dark stain that could not be washed out. The thing had left its outline clearly etched in its blood, and that outline was of no being of a sane and normal world. Grim and horrific it brooded there, like the shadow cast by one of the apish gods that squat on the shadowy altars of dim temples in this dark land of Stygia. Ooh, that was the Phoenix on the Sword. Exciting stuff. A lot going on as well. For circa 20-odd pages, a lot going on in there. Well, even more going on in the Scarlet Citadel, which somehow manages to pack in even more per page. And once again, it's killer opening paragraph time. And this is the one I remember. The roar of the battle had died away. The shout of victory mingled with the cries of the dying, like gay-hued leaves after an autumn storm. The fallen littered the plain. The sinking sun shimmered on burnished helmets, gilt-work mail, silver breastplates, broken swords and their heavy regal folds of silken standards, overthrown in pools of curdling crimson. In silent heaps lay war horses and their steel-clad riders, flowing manes and blowing plumes stained alike in the red tide. About them and among them, like the drift of a storm, were strewn slashed and trampled bodies in steel caps and leather jerkins, archers and pikemen. Oh, that's good stuff. That is so fucking solid.
Oh, yeah. And it's hard to beat Howard when it comes to lyricism in the writing. Just like the poetry, the visuals, the words he chooses to kind of paint this picture in your mind. It's just no author really that I've encountered does the same. Moorcock's got some great stuff, but yeah, Howard is in another league.
I think Moorcock gets close, but Howard edges it by some distance. I think he's the original and best when it comes to this stuff. It's staring, incredible stuff. So the setup for this is we find that post the Phoenix on the Sword, Conan has been requested to bring aid to his ally, King Amalrus, his neighbour.
Ophir.
Amalrus of Ophir, yeah. And at his request, he's led 5,000 Aquilonian knights to his aid to join a conflict against forces from Koth under King Strabonus, only to find out that Amalrus is a vicious turncoat who's lured Conan into a trap laid to defeat him, and he is now the last man standing of his force of 5,000, and he's facing down a whole host of baddies. You get this really nice account of how things went down. It said, without bowmen or infantry, he had hurled his armoured horsemen against the oncoming host, had seen the knights of his foes in their shining mail go down before his lances, had torn the opposing centre to bits, driving the riven ranks headlong before him, only to find himself caught in a vice as the untouched wings closed in. Strabonis' Shemitish bowman had wrought havoc among his knights, feathering them with shafts that found every crevice in their armour, shooting down the horses, the Cothian pikemen rushing in to spear the fallen riders. The mailed lances of the routed centre had reformed, reinforced by the riders from the wings, and had charged again and again, sweeping the field by sheer weight of numbers. The Aquilonians had not fled, they had died on the field, and of the 5,000 knights who had followed Conan southward, not one left the place of Shamu alive. And now the king himself stood at bay among the slashed bodies of his house troops, his back against a heap of dead horses and men. Ophirian knights in gilded mail leaped their horses over mounds of corpses to slash at the solitary figure. Squat Shemites with blue-back beards and dark-faced Cothian knights ringed him on foot. The clangor of steel rose deafeningly. The black-mailed figure of the Western king loomed among his swarming foes, dealing blows like a butcher wielding a great cleaver. Riderless horses raced down the field. About his iron-clad feet grew a ring of mangled corpses. His attackers drew back from his desperate savagery, panting and livid. Once again, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, not only is this great, not only does this stir the blood, but that account of archers against armoured knights is, we're fortunate these days to have been able to see, okay, on a slightly smaller scale, I suppose, the Branagh Henry V movie, which has a fairly good depiction of the Battle of Agincourt, albeit with only about 25 people because they had a limited budget. But have you ever seen a film called Chimes at Midnight?
No, I haven't.
The Orson Welles film. It's got an absolutely fantastic depiction of Agincourt. That first paragraph reads just like. But of course, the people reading this in 1933 or whenever it is haven't got the benefit of having seen anything like this. We've seen these massive battles now in Game of Thrones and all these different places. So these kind of vast battle scenes are kind of in our heads as a result of this stuff. But in 1930-something, this is incredibly vivid and descriptive image of that horrific situation where mounted knights get brought low by common men with bows, and then men with daggers and pikes run in and finish them off when they're in the mud. It's a really visceral, brutal image, and it's just perfectly captured by Howard's prose. It's fantastic. But of course, the other thing we'll add is there's another bloody sorcerer. So it's not Thothamon this time. It's, I forgot his name already. What's his name? The necromancer from Kos?
Sothalanti.
Yeah, Sothlanti, yeah. He craftily brings Conan to his knees through swiftness and sleight of hand and a poison pricker, so Conan is now unconscious. As it happens, there is a bit in here where we get another passage that's the type that Moorcock would seize on, although broad and somewhat in scope. So when Conan is drugged and in the back of a cart being dragged along, there's this little passage where it says, "A red cloud veiled his vision. His veins swelled with fury and in his temples a pulse throbbing maddeningly. In all his life he had never known greater and more helpless wrath. In swift-moving scenes the pageant of his life passed fleetingly before his mental eye, a panorama wherein moved shadowy figures which were himself in many guises and conditions. A skin-clad barbarian, a mercenary swordsman in horned helmet and scale-mail corselet, a corsair in a dragon-proud galley that trailed a crimson wake of blood and pillage across southern coasts, a captain of hosts in burnished steel on a rearing black charger, a king on a golden throne with a lion banner flowing above, and throngs of gay-hued courtiers and ladies on their knees. But always the jouncing and rumbling of the chariot brought his thoughts back to revolve with maddening monotony about the treachery of Amalrus and the sorcery of Thotha." Yeah, so in this case, Conan is literally recalling episodes in his life rather than alternate selves, but it's still something Moorcock picked up and ran with in his early stories. And I can't help but think all this stuff must have really stuck in Moorcock's 16-year-old head when he was reading this stuff, and it must have really, really inspired him to do that stuff. It's got to have been in there, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And then one thing, too, right after that, there's a sentence, "The veins nearly burst in his temples, and cries of the wounded in the chariots filled him with ferocious satisfaction." I just love that. I think that gives just a peek into Conan's, character. He's like, "Yeah, suffer, you bastards," as he's helpless in this
absolutely.
cart. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Once in the Citadel, he's bound just in a loincloth before his captors, and he takes the opportunity to tell them exactly what he thinks of them, and he has a somewhat vitriolic outburst, some of which may be slightly controversial, but let's start with a point where he spits in the dude's eye. So let's have a look. Our desires are quickly spoken, King of Aquilonia, said Sotha. It is our wish to extend our empire.
And so you want to swine my kingdom?
What are you but an adventurer, seizing a crown to which you had no more claim than any other wandering barbarian, parried Alnorus. We are prepared to offer you suitable compensation.
Compensation? The price of infamy and treachery. I am a barbarian, so I shall sell my kingdom and its people for life in your filthy gold. Ha! How did you come to your crown, you and that black-faced pig beside you? Sorry, everybody. Your fathers did the fighting and the suffering and handed their crowns to you on golden platters. What you inherited without lifting a finger, except to poison a few brothers, I fought for. You sit on satin and guzzle wine the people sweat for and talk of divine rights of sovereignty. Ah! I climbed out of the abyss of naked barbarism to the throne, and in that climb I spilt my blood as freely as I spilt that of others. If either of us has the right to rule men, by crom it is I. How have you proved yourself my superiors? I found Aquilonia in the grip of a pig like you, one who traced his genealogy for 1,000 years. The land was torn with wars of the barons, and the people cried out under oppression and taxation. Today, no Aquilonian noble dares maltreat the humblest of my subjects, and the taxes of the people are lighter than anywhere else in the world. What of you? Your brother Amalric holds the eastern half of your kingdom and defies you. And you, Strabanus, your soldiers are even now besieging castles of a dozen or more rebellious barons. The people of both your kingdoms are crushed into the earth by tyrannous taxes and levies, and you would loot mine? Ha! Free my hands and I'll varnish this floor with your brains.
That's an interesting outburst. Two things to take away from that. One is, well, three things. One is, it's classic Conan, spitting in the face of civilised nobles. Two, it identifies Conan as a low taxation libertarian leader.
That's exactly right.
Libertarian in the true form, not just not populist libertarian, true libertarian who looks after his people and doesn't want them to be exploited by nobles, which is why they all love him. Probably a reflection of Robert E Howard's attitude to these things. But you get the other reflection, perhaps, of Robert E Howard's attitude with the outburst of the black pig next to you.
Yeah, black-faced pig, that's a rough one. Oof.
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts on that. I'm always prepared for some questionable invective in books of this age.
Yeah.
And whilst initially jarring, it probably is pretty tame compared to what else you can come across in these books. He uses blackface as a descriptor, but he also uses the insult of pig as an equal opportunity tag when he refers to his the prior king, who he strangled.
Yeah.
He refers to him as a pig also. But yeah, it is quite jarring. And again, you've got to be prepared for this stuff. And I think we'll come back to this at the end because, as I said before, I pulled a book down off the shelf, which has got a couple of interesting things in, which we'll pick up on. But the narrative also refers to the Kothian guards as the Blacks, or Giant Blacks, and there are numerous references to the Blacks. But we've seen from The Winds of Limbo and a couple of other stories that Moorcock was describing black characters as the Negro, or the Negroes, in the 60s, over 30 years later. So whilst this is jarring, I think it could be a lot worse. But we will talk about worse.
Oh yeah.
At the end.
And we'll get to some of the descriptions a little later on.
Yes. There's more to come.
There's more to come.
Yeah.
And that was
there's more to come.
Reading this again, you think of the amazing plot, you think of the amazing visuals, and then when I was reading this at 15, you come across that and you're like, oh shit, well that was weird. Yeah. And then you just kind of continue on because it's an amazing story. Reading this again in 2024, in the context of all that's happened in America since then, as a more mature reader, it was a bit more appalling personally. But anyway.
Yeah, and I think the thing with this stuff is you've got to tackle it head on. You can't make excuses.
No.
And we will tackle it head on, and we'll have a think about just how racist was Robert E. Howard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But on with the story. So the necromancer condemns Conan to a dark and terrible space beneath the Citadel that even his guards are terrified of. And we do get quite a cool passage at the beginning of chapter 3. It says, King Conan tested the ring in the wall and the chain that bound him. His limbs were free, but he knew that his shackles were beyond even his iron strength. The links of the chain were as thick as his thumb and were fastened to a band of steel about his waist, a band broad as his hand and half an inch thick. The sheer weight of his shackles could have slain a lesser man with exhaustion. The locks that held band and chain were massive affairs that a sledgehammer could hardly have dinted. As for the ring, evidently it went clearly through the wall and was clinched on the other side. Conan cursed, and panic surged through him as he glared into the darkness that pressed against the half-circle of light. All the superstitious dread of the barbarian slept in his soul, untouched by civilized logic. His primitive imagination peopled the subterranean darkness with grisly shapes. Besides, his reason told him that he had not been placed there merely for confinement. His captors had no reason to spare him. He had been placed in these pits for a definite doom. He cursed himself for his refusal of their offer, even while his stubborn manhood revolted at the thought, and he knew that were he taken forth and given another chance, his reply would be the same. He would not sell his subjects to the butcher, and yet it had been with no thought of anyone's gain but his own that he had seized the kingdom originally. Thus subtly does the instinct of sovereign responsibility enter even a red-handed plunderer, sometimes. Conan thought of Sotha's last abominable threat and groaned in sick fury, knowing it was no idle boast. Men and women were to the wizard no more than the writhing insect is to the scientist. Soft white hands that had caressed him, red lips that had been pressed to his, dainty white bosoms that had quivered to his hot fierce kisses, to be stripped of their delicate skin, white as ivory and pink as young petals. From Conan's lips burst a yell so frightful and inhuman in its mad fury that a listener would have started in horror to know it came from a human throat. The shuddering echoes made him start and brought back his own situation vividly to the king. He glared fearsomely at the outer gloom, thought of all the grisly tales he had heard of Sotha's necromantic cruelty, and it was with icy sensation down his spine that he realised these must be the very halls of horror named in shuddering legendary, the tunnels and dungeons where Sotha performed horrible experiments with beings human, bestial, and, it was whispered, demoniac, tampering blasphemously with the naked, basic elements of life itself. Rumour said that the mad poet Ronaldo had visited these pits and had been shown horrors by the wizard, and that the nameless monstrosities which he hinted at in his awful poem, The Song of the Pit, were no mere fantasies of a disordered brain. That brain had crashed to dust beneath Conan's battle-axe on the night the king had fought for his life with the assassins the mad rhymer had led into the betrayed palace, but the shuddersome words of that grisly song still rang in the king's ears as he stood there in his chains. It's a terrific reminder of the core of Conan's character. Even after all these years of adventure and ascending to the throne, he abhors magic, and the dark things that lurk in the id really, really bother him, and he does get frightened, and he does get terrified. It's a great passage. I really, really like that.
Oh, yeah.
Sadly, it turns out that the terrible monster in the Underdark, the first one at least, is mildly disappointing. It's an 80-foot snake with acidic venom, basically. We will later find out it's called, is it Satha?
Satha
the snake.
Not to be confused with Satha, the sorcerer. So, I was listening to an audiobook of this, too, while I was, reading the story, preparing for this, and, Satha and Satha. I'm like, oh, God, that's confusing. Come on, Howard. Something a little bit different.
Fortunately, he's about to get eaten, but an interruption saves his bacon, and mixed feelings about this chapter start to emerge again quite quickly when a huge naked black man with a sword and a bunch of keys comes to mock him. And we do get a nice bit of Conan lore in that this guy's a former chief from the coast of Kush, and Conan slew his brother when he was a pirate and was known along that coast as Amra the Lion. And of course, in the Dark Horse one, we get that tied into the Belit, Queen of the Coast stuff, because Belit is also name checked, isn't she, in the Scarlet Citadel comic version. This fellow wants Conan's head. I think that's quite reasonable, given he was chief of a town that Conan pillaged, chief of a free town that Conan pillaged, and after fleeing, he got sold into slavery in Stygia and rocked up here as the manservant of a hunchbacked eunuch jailer in the Underdark dungeons where the horrific experimentation of Sotha the Sorcerer / Necromancer keeps them all. So his motivation, I think, is quite reasonable.
I should say so.
They exchange insults, black dog / white dog, but then the snake intervenes and bites into the poor bloke's head. And we get an unfortunate description of the scream that escapes his, and I quote, thick, blubbery lips.
Yeah.
Oh, my word.
Oh, yeah, that's a bad one.
Yeah.
Especially because later on, not too much later on, we'll also, Conan will run into a creature which is also described as having thick, blubbery lips and like the head of sort of like a frog kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's, kind of some unfortunate dots to be connected there.
Yeah. Well, there is a quote that I'm going to read to you at the end, which is really quite alarming, and adds some context to all of this. But for now, the snake drags his booty away. Fortunately, the keys and sword were dropped so Conan can grab them both, free himself. And the fat eunuch jailer is on the other side of some iron bars, and Conan realises that he's seen him, so he runs him through to make himself feel better. But unfortunately, that means that he can't get out because the eunuch has locked the door from the other side. So he's a bit buggered. He can't use the keys to get him out. So he's got to go try and make for less scary surroundings by going deeper into the dungeons. And yes, that one that you just mentioned is the next one he comes across. And it's basically a Lovecraftian horror, isn't it?
It's amazing.
It meeps and makes human crying sounds. The weeping grew nearer as he advanced and lifted his torch he made out of vague shape in the shadows. Stepping closer, he halted in sudden horror at the anthropomorphic bulk which sprawled before him. Its unstable outline somewhat suggested an octopus, but its malformed tentacles were too short for its size, and its substance was a quaking, jelly-like stuff which made him physically sick to look at. From among this loathsome, gelid mess reared up a frog-like head, and he was frozen with nauseated horror to realise that the sound of weeping was coming from those obscene, blubbery lips. The noise changed to an abominable high-pitched tittering as the great unstable eyes of the monstrosity rested on him, and it hitched its quaking bulk towards him. He backed away and fled up the tunnel, not trusting his sword. The creature might be composed of terrestrial matter, but it shook his very soul to look upon it, and he doubted the power of man-made weapons to harm it. For a short distance he heard it flopping and floundering after him, screaming with horrible laughter. The unmistakably human note in its mirth almost staggered his reason. It was exactly such laughter as he had heard bubble obscenely from the fat lips of the salacious women of Shadizar, city of wickedness, when captive girls were stripped naked on the public auction block. By what hellish arts had Sotha brought this unnatural being into life? Conan felt vaguely that he had looked on blasphemy against the eternal laws of nature. And that there are some more horrors as well. So this experimentation angle, all these eldritch horrors, do call to mind a Lovecraft short story.
Absolutely.
Which I thought might have been an influence, The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, because that has a similar section where you have all the terrible creatures that are like sort of hidden below Charles Dexter Ward's house, I think, from memory. So I looked that up, and that was written in 1927, but it wasn't published until after Lovecraft's death in the 1940s. So maybe the reverse was true. Maybe this story seeded the idea in Lovecraft's head, because the authors that corresponded together and shared weird tales page space with, they did borrow liberally from each other, even adopting each other's creations in terms of things like mythology and unspeakable terms and documents. So, yeah, you never know. This might have had some kind of influence on The Case of Charles Dexter Ward.
Very
I guess we'll never know. Yeah, we'll never know.
Have to reread
but
that.
Conan also finds a bloke, and this moment gave me my first laugh reading this story. Maybe my second laugh. I did laugh anyway, because it comes across this guy, and this is really well done in the Dark Horse comic, I thought. This man is sort of being absorbed by vegetation and plants and obscene-looking flowers, but he frees him, and there's this really amusing exchange. So he's freed him, and he says, "Men call me Peleus." And Conan goes, "What? Peleus the sorcerer? Sothlantis' rival, who vanished from the earth 10 years ago?"
Conan is so well read. He knew Epimetheus from 15 years ago. He knows about Peleus. He's keeping track of all these sorcerers. He doesn't trust them.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's like most of Howard's dialogue is pleasingly functional, but it's flavourfully archaic and manages to avoid any annoyingly obvious expositional stodge. But that one is pretty clunky. Peleus the sorcerer, Sothlantis' rival, who vanished from the earth 10 years ago? Question mark, question mark, question mark. But anyway, Conan's freed Peleus from some weird plant-based bondage. And he does offer some interesting exposition about the catacombs they're in, which is cool, and I dig it. And I think you made reference to it earlier. And it's really, really excellent, because it is about the age of Hyboria. Conan asks whether Sotha dug those pits for the reason, just to house these monstrosities, and Pele says, he did not dig them. When the city was founded 3,000 years ago, there were ruins of an earlier city on and about this hill. King Kossuth V, the founder, built his palace on this hill, and digging cellars beneath it came upon a walled-up doorway, which he broke into and discovered the pits, which were about as we see them now. But his Grand Vizier came to such a grisly end in them that Kossuth, in fright, walled up the entrance again. He said the Vizier fell into a well, but he had the cellars filled in and later abandoned the palace itself and built himself another in the suburbs, from which he fled in panic on discovering some black mould scattered on the marble floor of his chamber one morning. He then departed with his whole court to the eastern corner of the kingdom and built a new city. The palace on the hill was not used and fell into ruins. When Akutha I revived the lost glories of Cor Shemish, he built a fortress there. It remained for Soth Lanti to rear the Scarlet Citadel and open the way to the pits again. Whatever fate overtook the Grand Vizier of Kossuth, Sotha avoided it. He fell into no well, although he did descend into a well he found, and came out with a strange expression, which has not since left his eyes. I love the fact that, even though this is set in a forgotten prehistory of our world, the setting of Hyboria, as you said, is built upon the ruins of yet older civilizations and darker seeds of weird shit. So it means that the setting, even though it's like ancient, is still super steeped and layered in weirdness and prehistory, even further prehistory. And I think there are references in other stories to Hyperborea being like where the really, really old denizens of Hyboria still live, and they're really, really ancient. Yeah, it's good stuff. And it lends everything a much deeper sense of texture and weirdness and mystery. Yeah. So it is actually canon. It is actually established that this is a later world than Kull's Atlantis. It's all part of the same.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's in the I think it's the Hyborian Age essay that Howard wrote. So it
Right.
kind of establishes it there. But yeah, basically, yeah. So Atlantis, King Kull, that whole epoch, that whole era, there's some great cataclysm which of course swallows Atlantis, and then it reshapes the world and stuff like that. And the continents drift over time much quicker than they normally would, but geologically speaking. But anyway, and then eventually you get the Hyborian Age, and then that rises and falls sometime after Conan's life. And then eventually from there, you get into the ancient history of our world, presumably.
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes that the Marcus Nispel Conan the Barbarian remake movie made was that it had that opening crawl, which the entire plot relied on this like super ancient backstory of Hyboria, rather than just establishing something interesting about Hyboria. It's good that all that stuff exists, but it should be mystery, and the fact that they have this opening crawl and the villain is reassembling a crown from
the crown of
the
Acheron.
prehistory of Hyboria. That was all poor. That was all. We should talk about that movie for a second.
Oh God! All right. I certainly have a lot of thoughts, but mostly it's just been me trying to forget that actually happened. I've never been viscerally upset by a movie as I was exiting that one, by how let down I was. Oh man, I was so looking forward to it, but that was a big deep letdown.
Was there anything good that you took from it?
The opening scene of Conan as a kid, completely unnecessary, but at least it was more accurate to Conan's upbringing than him being a slave and his village being wiped out by Thulsa Doom and all that in the 82 Conan. But that being said, at least that one explained why he was so buff and ripped. It's because he was pushing this huge grain mill all day until everybody else died. He was the only one doing it. So, and then the gladiator pits, okay, that's how I understand some of the choices that they made in the 82 movie as like an origin movie. But, that's also the thing that we get into with these stories is like you really don't need an origin story for Conan. He wanders around and he gets into trouble, and he's just the character that he is, and that's the fun part. The most interesting framing device they could choose would be kind of like what's set up in like the Dark Horse comics too, where he's a king and he's relating his stories to somebody, to Prospero or something like that. Just use that as a framing device. But anyway.
I really like the framing device in that Scarlet Citadel adaptation. I like the fact it's Conan telling the story to somebody when he's much older.
Yeah.
I think it really works.
It really does.
It works excellently. But yeah, you're right. You do not need... you don't need to know that his dad was a blacksmith.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, I fucking love Ron Perlman as much as the next guy. But the massive... my eyes nearly rolled back so far into my head that they just fucking burst when... we saw Ron Perlman with the big fake beard and the fake wig as his dad. Because round about the same time, I think I've seen a film called Outlander, which has got Jim Caviezel as a spaceman who lands in Viking land, and there's a space monster. And Ron Perlman's in that as a Viking, and it was like those two films happened around about the same time. It's like, I know Ron Perlman will do anything.
Yeah.
You know, for any film.
And anything but try an accent.
Yeah. Except in Enemy of the Gates, when he puts on a Cockney accent to play a Russian sniper, which is fucking a baffling choice.
Weird.
Yeah, but...
that's really weird.
I think that was probably around about the time he also did that Nicolas Cage movie where they've got to transport... They're both Templars and they have to transport a witch.
Oh, Season of the Witch.
Season of the Witch, and it's Nick Cage and Ron Perlman as Templars.
Yeah.
So Ron Perlman went through it's a guilty pleasure for me, that film.
Yeah. I enjoyed it for what it was.
We put that on about once a year. It's so bad. But it's good bad. It's good bad.
It's fun.
I think there was probably... I mean, I like... I can't remember Aquaman. What's Aquaman's real name? Why is it
Jason Momoa.
Jason Momoa. I think Jason Momoa's got charisma to burn. And I liked the fact that he was playing a young Conan who smiled and laughed and
had a good time.
Looked handy. He was the best thing about it. I also quite liked the kid who played him. I think it was completely unnecessary to have the backstory. But the bit where they have the race with the eggs in their mouths and he comes back from the race with the two Picts' heads that he's hacked off.
Yeah.
And he just drops them on the floor and then spits the egg out. He did it all and didn't break the egg.
Yeah.
I thought was a fantastic, very, very Conan moment. Like almost contemptuously spits the egg out and it breaks when it hits the floor and only when it hits the floor. Because this 12-year-old kid not only beat all the other kids in the village, but also hacked the heads off 2 or 3 Picts while he did it all and never broke the egg. I really, really like that. And in a different movie, in a not Conan movie, I really, really would have dug that. Yeah, but some of the special effects and the 3D stuff and the villain was terrible.
Awful.
Yeah. It was not good.
It was super cheesy.
Anyway, we've talked about it. So when it comes to Conan movies, number 1 obviously Milius 82. Number 2 for me, Conan the Destroyer. Number 3, Marcus Nispel, Jason Momoa. Conan the Barbarian, sadly. Yeah, it's a shame. But it's weird. Marcus Nispel was just getting every fucking gig going at the time. He got the Friday the 13th gig, Friday the 13th remake gig. He got the Texas Chainsaw Massacre gig. I like Pathfinder.
Pathfinder was pretty
I think it's an odd film.
It's really odd.
Yeah, but it's much better than Conan.
The visuals were cool. The Viking armor and all that. Yeah, that one was also a pretty cool little B-movie, fun watch.
It's a much better film than Conan the Barbarian. I'll give it that.
That's not a high bar, I'm sad to say.
Man. I really don't know what happened to Marcus Nispel because he had did those 4 or 5 films over a brief period of time, and it seemed like, was it Platinum Dunes, whatever the company was, anything that came up in terms of a property remake, he got the gig. So yeah, he did Chainsaw Massacre, he did Jason, and he did Conan the Barbarian all in the space of 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And I think he did Pathfinder just before all that. And then it just seems to have vanished without a trace. I've no idea what he's done since then.
Maybe Conan the Barbarian was just such a huge disappointment for all involved that that was it. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah, possible.
Maybe.
Possible. Did you ever watch the Conan TV series with Ralph Moore?
I did on YouTube. I watched it. I watched, I think, part of one episode, and I was like, all right, that'll do. That'll do for me.
Years and years and years ago, I pursued a DVD box set for ages to try and get hold of it because I thought, I don't care how bad it is. It must be so bad it's good. And it was just bad.
It was just bad.
It was just really bad.
Oh, God. It was that. Okay, that is worse than the Momoa, Conan the Barbarian. That TV series. That's probably the worst adaptation ever of Conan. Well, then there's the animated cartoon also, which I haven't seen, so who knows?
No, I've never seen it either.
Oh, man.
Yeah. But, yeah. Funny enough, when it comes to TV shows of things, for my birthday, I got the 70s Planet of the Apes TV series.
Interesting.
Which I'd never seen since I was a kid. I don't think I ever saw them all. And I remember seeing it. I remember loving it as a kid because Roddy McDowall was in it. And it's a bit like the Logan's Run TV show was, where every week they're just getting chased every week by the same people.
Yeah.
So in the Logan's Run TV series, they were getting chased by Francis, and in the Planet of the Apes TV series, they're getting chased by Urko. And yeah, I want to like it a lot more than I actually do, but it is watchable. It does have its moments. Yeah, it's better than the Conan Ralph Moeller series.
A ringing endorsement, everybody. Go on and give it a watch.
Yeah, need to get that on the cover, on the DVD slipcase cover. Yeah,
there you go.
Better than Ralph Moeller Conan. Yeah. Anyway, back to this story. So the giant snake, which we've learned is called Sather, and it's the oldest of the necromancer's old things, rocks back up, but it goes eye to eye with Peleus in a really funny moment where it decides that discretion is the better part of valour, and much to Conan's surprise, just fucks off. Which I thought was excellent. Peleus' explanation is brilliant because he says that serpents see into the essence of things, and while you see my fleshy body, Sather the snake sees only my naked soul.
And Conan looks at his sword and he's just like, contemplates just stabbing him right then and there, just killing this fucking sorcerer because he's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, and I like Peleus more and more because that causes, in inverted commas, an icy trickle down the barbarian's spine. Because, of course, he's freed this guy in the buds for now, but, Peleus is like, it's serious business, is this Peleus guy. And then Peleus temporarily reanimates the dead fat eunuch to open the door for them to the dungeon and gets them out. And there's this wonderful line, and it says, his task is done. Hell gaped for him again, said Peleus pleasantly, politely affecting not to notice the strong shudder which shook Conan's mighty frame. Absolutely brilliant. Peleus is ace. I love him. It's just such a great line. His task is done and hell gaped for him again, said Peleus pleasantly, politely affecting not to notice the strong shudder which shook Conan's mighty frame. So it's this like super polite guy who didn't want to put Conan at ill ease. It's brilliant. And things like that make it easy to forget that Howard was this small town Texan loner that despised civilization and civilized people, and would randomly take to growing a massive droopy tash and wear a sombrero, or shadow box up and down the high street on a whim. He was a fucking weird guy. He was a weird guy, but more on that in a bit, I guess. So they find a comfy lounge full of silky cushions, share some wine. Peleus grabs a big scrying crystal and shows Conan what's going on at home, where his city's in chaos. The baddie kings are assaulting the border town, the name of which I forget, and his last allies and barons are squabbling over the throne, thinking him dead. So Peleus, quite helpfully, when Conan says, I'll never get there in time to sort all this out, summons a giant bat with a weird head so Conan can get there and crack some heads, which is pretty cool. And Peleus also says, don't worry, I'll meet you there. Yeah, very good. And the next chapter is, I fucking love this chapter. There's barely any dialogue in it, because it's actually, these stories are really dialogue heavy. Yeah. Aren't they? That's something that surprised me when I reread them. They're extremely dialogue heavy. And this one, though, is an account of the political machinations and moving and shaking that could actually have been expanded to another 5 chapters.
This could have been a whole
in terms
book.
Of actually, it really could.
Yeah.
But Howard's writing pulp, so suffice to say that after some slaughter and chaos and mob uprising and conflict between nobles and like the random insertion of like a student leader who kind of opposes, the nobles, but has to escape the city before they do him in. There's so many brilliant little seeds of detail and texture to this city scene. And then this guy, Arpello, grabs the throne. And the Kushites are at the gates demanding the surrender of the city. Arpello's drunk on power, not doing anything particularly useful. I think the Scarlet Citadel Dark Horse adaptation adds a little bit more reasoning to Arpello and suggests that he was the guy who the Kushites were going to establish as a puppet king. But I don't think that's actually in the Scarlet Citadel, the short story, he's just a bit of a dick. And he's drunk on power, not doing anything particularly useful. And then the giant bat drops naked and bloody Conan off the palace, and he lobs Arpello off a tower. Which is absolutely brilliant. I love it. So Arpello is like king for a couple of hours. Then Conan just arrives naked, angry. Arpello attacks him with a sword, and Conan lobs him off a tower, and he falls 150 feet to his death. And there's a great bit in the Dark Horse bit where they're all going, King Conan, King Conan. They're all chanting his name after he's thrown Arpello to his death. It's fantastic. And the final chapter is, again, it's another battle account. It's a brilliant account of a siege and all of the action that goes on around it. And once again, you know that Robert E Howard probably spent ages studying accounts of battles and understanding how army composition worked in medieval times, because it all feels really authentic. It's great stuff. But as a shock to them, because they have no idea that Conan's still alive, Conan rocks up with an army of Poitanian cavalry, knights, a ragtag host of mercenaries, and Gunderland archers, and it's battle on. And I think because we've been here an hour and 45 minutes already, we're probably better cut to the chase on this one.
Oh, wow.
It goes Conan's way, despite horrific losses, but it ends with the necromancer fleeing, wailing in despair that his plans have come to naught, with Conan in pursuit. And it's a terrific chapter, and all that stuff's great, but I just want us to read the last couple of pages because I think they're pretty entertaining. On they fled, the hunted and the hunter, and not a foot could the black stallion gain, though he strained each nerve and thew. Through a sunset land of dim light and elusive shadows they fled, till sight and sound of the slaughter died out behind them. Then in the sky appeared a dot that grew into a huge eagle as it approached. Swooping down from the sky, it drove at the head of Sotha's steed, which screamed and reared, throwing his rider. Old Sotha rose and faced his pursuer, his eyes those of a maddened serpent, his face an inhuman mask of awful fury. In each hand he held something that shimmered, and Conan knew he held death there. The king dismounted and strode towards his foe, his armour clanking, his great sword gripped high.
Again we meet, wizard.
Keep off! Screamed Sotha like a blood-mad jackal. I'll blast the flesh from your bones. You cannot conquer me. If you hack me in pieces, the bits of flesh and bone will reunite and haunt you to your doom. I see the hand of Peleus in this, but I defy ye both. I am Sotha, son of... Conan rushed, sword gleaming, eye slits of weariness. Sotha's right hand came back and forward, and the king ducked quickly. Something passed by his helmeted head and exploded behind him, searing the very sands with a flash of hellish fire. Before Sotha could toss the globe in his left hand, Conan's sword sheared through his lean neck. The wizard's head shot from his shoulders on an arching fount of blood, and the robed figure staggered and crumpled drunkenly. Yet the mad black eye glared up at Conan with no dimming of their feral light. The lips writhed awfully, and the hands groped hideously, as if searching for their severed head. Then, with a rush of wings, something swooped from the sky, the eagle which had attacked Sotha's horse. In its mighty talons it snatched up the dripping head and soared skyward. And Conan stood struck dumb, for from the eagle's throat boomed human laughter in the voice of Peleus the sorcerer. Then a hideous thing came to pass, for the headless body reared up from the sand, and staggered away in awful flight on stiffening legs, hands outstretched blindly towards the dot speeding and dwindling in the dusty sky. Conan stood like one turned to stone, watching until the swift reeling figure faded in the dusk that purpled the meadows.
Crom, I'm a rein on these wizardly feuds. Peleus has dealt well with me, but I care not if I see him no more. Give me a clean sword and a clean foe to flesh it in. Damnation what I would not give for a flagon of wine.
The end of the Scarlet Citadel, which I think is it's such a wonderful ending. Soth gets decapitated. A giant eagle flies down and nicks it, and then his body stands up and runs after the eagle as it flies away. And Conan's just stood there like, wine?
These goddamn wizards. I'm so sick of this magic shit.
Yeah.
What a day I've had.
Yes. It's fantastic. And you know what? Those stories total maybe 65 pages. And holy shit, there is so much content in there. You've got horror, you've got cosmic weirdness, you've got assassinations, you've got mystery, you've got battles, you've got political machinations, you've got accounts of sieges, you've got weird wizard shit going on. When it comes to heroic fantasy, those 65 pages have got everything. It's incredible, really.
Yeah.
Where does this stand in the pantheon of not just pulp, but fantasy fiction?
I mean, I think, this story really... To me, it always stuck in my mind as being one of the ultimate Conan stories, one of the ultimate kind of weird tales, because it does so succinctly encompass kind of everything that you could get. You have Robert E. Howard's knack for action, his poetry, the way that he can just kind of so concisely say in so few words so many things. You have epic battles, you have the eldritch Lovecraftian kind of horrors. I mean, chapter 3, and obviously for the listeners, we're trying to get through the story, we're going through this, but like, read the story, especially that chapter 3. There's so much like just oozing, dripping, dark, just atmosphere in the writing that, and reading that in class in the middle of the day, I was fucking terrified. That's how powerful that the writing is, and there's so much just absolute utter weirdness that gets described. At one point there's this like disembodied, Conan can just kind of sense that there's like a presence, like a conscious. He can't see it, he can't feel it. He almost falls in this well that has this like pulsing kind of air kind of coming up, and you're like, is this it's not spelled out, but like as a reader you're like is this like the breath of some like unfathomably huge thing like coming from this well? Because Conan's like, well, there can't be a well, we're like way below the city, like there's no way, like what is this going down to? It's just there's so many cool little ideas that just kind of get thrown at you. And and Moorcock is also an expert at this, just like setting up something where you just read it and it's almost like a throwaway line, which just you can just hang on and be like, hold on, what did they just say? What's going on here? Like, what the hell? And anyway, so yeah, for me, this is the at the top of one of like the ultimate kind of like weird tales that you could read.
I always love it when you get like just little throwaway lines that could be interpreted as dangling threads. That when they're getting out of the Charles Dexter Ward style Dungeon of Horrors, he asks Peleus if there are any other ways out, and he says, well, the only other way out goes further down. We'll probably want to avoid that one. And it's like, holy shit, there's even worse stuff down there.
Yeah.
And it's just a passing reference, but that the darkness and the horror goes even deeper. And it's unsettling, and it's great stuff. It's great stuff. But unfortunately, we're at the point where we've got to confront some of the slightly more dubious aspects of some of this stuff. Now, there's a temptation whenever you're confronted by this stuff, particularly in old stuff, is to dismiss it or compartmentalise it as attitudes of the time, isn't there? It's like the 1920s or the 1930s or whatever. Or maybe even attitudes of the characters, not the writers, because they're writing fictional characters. Moorcock, when he wrote My Experiences in the Third World War, the character that he's writing about is, to all intents and purposes, engaging in paedophilic behaviour, and various other questionable things, but you take it that he's writing a jaded Cold War era, Third World War era Russian spy living in England and the United States. So it's grim, but you take that on board because it's intended to be grim. But to what point do you separate the artist from the art with stuff like this? Well, I pulled this down off the shelf. So this is A Means to Freedom, The Letters of H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard. This is Volume 1, 1930 to 1932, edited by S.T. Joshi, David Schultz and Rusty Burke. And of course, Joshi is like the foremost Lovecraft scholar these days, isn't he? And does a lot of the editing for a lot of this stuff and was responsible for editing probably the majority of Lovecraft stories that you buy these days, or any volumes. They're probably the S.T. Joshi edited versions from the 1990s. I looked this up and I was just kind of interested. So I read the introduction, and straight away they do address this, and it says, it must be pointed out that the two writers did agree on one point, that of race, because there are apparently they did have a lot of disagreements and a lot of healthy and unhealthy debates about a number of different things. It says, it must be pointed out that the two writers did agree on one point, that of race. The letters leave little doubt that both Lovecraft and Howard were imbued with prejudice against African Americans, Jews, and other minorities, and certain passages in these letters do not make pleasant reading today. Lovecraft, in relating the history of Rhode Island and of New England, found occasion to note that the foreign overrunning of America was the most tragic event in the continent's history. While Howard, although engagingly relating the oral ghost stories he heard from the local Negroes, could not help lamenting, "I'm afraid that in a few generations Texas will be overrun with mongrels." At this point I thought, well, I'm just going to flip the book up, because it's a pretty hefty book, and when you look at index, there isn't anything, there isn't an index entry for race or racial discussions. So I just decided to just flip it open at a random page.
Oh boy.
And, well, at my very first random page flip, I came across this. This is Howard writing to Lovecraft in 1930. And it says, "Yes, the lower country is filling up with Latins and Polacks, and even the Mexicans resent that fact. I remember the conversation of a certain Spanish-Italian desperado, one Chico the Desperate, whose real name was Marcheca, on the road to San Antonio a few years ago. Chico was suspicious and reticent at first, but soon warmed up and narrated his crimes with a gusto that kept me roaring with laughter. He was either a monumental liar or the most atrocious rogue unhung. But what amused me most was his violent denunciations of the foreigners who were stealing the country. He was in favour of deporting all Germans, Polacks, and even Italians, who had come over within the last generation and giving their land to natural Americans, including himself." And he goes on, it says, "I'll freely grant an Englishman, Scotchman, Irishman or Welshman the right to become an American the instant his foot touches American soil. But as far as I'm concerned, a Wop or a Slav can't become American in 500 years. So that's Italians and Slavs and Polacks that is addressed. Well, just in case that's not enough, the letter is responding to Lovecraft has laid out his academic opinion on the origin of Jews and the racial origin of Jews going back to the Assyrians. Howard says, "I was also much interested in your remarks pertaining to Assyrians and Turanians. True, the Assyrian nose is non-Turanian, and you were probably right in assuming that the resemblance between the Assyrian of yesterday and the Russian Jew of today can be traced to the Semitic relationship. The truly Semitic Jew is doubtless superior to the Mongoloid Jew in moral and cultural respects. However, the Mongoloid type seems to be the more aggressive of the two, judging from the great swarms of Jews now swamping the ranks of pugilism. Most Jewish fighters seem to have been born in Russia or Poland, or to have ancestral linkings with those countries, and they make, on the whole, skillful and courageous fighters. I imagine that combination you mentioned, Semitic nose, Mongol eyes, Aryan hair, etc., produces a weird effect, even more so than the red-headed..." Now, I'm going to apologise in advance, and I'll put a content warning at the beginning of this. "The red-headed you occasionally see in the South. The most inhuman hybrid I ever saw was standing in the doorway of a laundry shop not far off Canal Street in New Orleans. He, or it, was as black as any Negro I ever saw, but had the slant eyes and broad features of a Chinaman. He even wore a pigtail and had his hands in the wide sleeves of a typically Chinese outfit."
Wow. Well, I feel like I need a shower.
Yeah. And these letters go on for pages and pages and pages. They're absolutely colossal. And they even share their opinion on how... And it's almost like pseudo-scientific takes. This could be the fucking Joe Rogan podcast that you're reading the transcript of half the time.
Basically.
Because they've got one here. It says, "The civilization you mentioned on the African East Coast must have been a very mixed one, possibly an invading settlement of Hamitic conquerors with a substratum of black aborigines, the whole modified more or less by a filtration of Semites from the east. What noble speculations the matter brings up. With a mingling of such passionate bloods as these, what violent intrigues, what plots and counterplots, what savage crimes and what dark murders must have shaken the walls and palaces of that vanished civilization." Well, this is the kicker. "I agree with you in doubting that the seeds of cultural development are present in the Negroid race as a whole. They can ape and copy, but that they could build a civilization on their own, I doubt."
Right. Man.
Lovecraft and Howard were obviously consumed with a cultural fear and that undercurrent of seething rage at what they see of contamination of what makes them comfortable. And both were too high on their own farts to understand, on a pure empathetic level, the things that they actually feared. The problem is, when we think about, well, they were of their time, is all this shit is around us right now as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just of their time, it's of our time, and it's really, really relevant now. That letter was written in 1930, and other than it being better written than the shit that's flying around now, it proves that fear of the other and simple unwillingness to broaden a worldview is really as stark now as it was then, because we're recording this 24 hours after a series of far-right riots across England in majority white working-class towns, including my hometown of Hull. And if you close your eyes, you can see the picture. White, middle-aged, red-faced dimwits goading the police, attacking people of colour, setting fire to shops, mosques and police stations, looting stores, the usual crap from these idiots. But there's an underlying context to it all that's driven by the same ideas of culture and race that Lovecraft and Howard were espousing and in their own civilised way discussing in their 47-page long, foolscap, typewritten letters to each other. And the right-wing news feeds and public figures are spouting the same shit right now. And these people who feel marginalised or disenfranchised or poor or any combination of the above after years of austerity and societal decay are being handed the perfect rationale for this outrageous behaviour, because even without the cost of living crisis and everything else, the dragging to the right of everything in society by the media, by the populism of Trump or Brexit or whatever else you have on your neighbourhood, because I know it's happening in Canada, it's happening in Australia, normalising messaging in the media that 15 years ago just simply would not have been acceptable dialogue in the media, in polite company, or anywhere but the tightest knit circles of people that think that way. It's now, it's not of 1930. It's unacceptable now and people are still spouting it. So the sad thing is, if you defend Lovecraft or Howard for having those beliefs, you might as well normalise the cunts that spit on and attack people of colour and exercise their right to protest by wrecking a shoe zone shop and burning some 30-quid brogues on a pedestrianised area in Hull. And as funny as the video of the idiot in Southport getting bricks to the head and the bollocks from thick knobheads behind him because their Aryan Superman muscles couldn't get him as far as the police line, I'm getting to the point now where even sharing and laughing at that normalises them as Benny Hill clowns instead of denouncing them as the real others in all of this shitty mess. It's really quite depressing. And being confronted with it reading a Conan story written in 1932, and it actually resonating so much because of things that happened yesterday, I never thought would be here.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. Yeah.
So what do you do with it all? You know, do you separate the art from the artist when the stuff we want to say is of its time just isn't? Fuck.
I mean, that's a great moral conundrum, and I mean, ultimately, I mean, yeah, like I was saying before, I mean, you know, when I read this story, it was in the context of definitely a different time in America. I mean, obviously, I was, you know, a kid in high school. I didn't really know the truth about this country and the history and all that stuff yet, and a lot of that stuff isn't really taught in normal schools. It wasn't until I was in college and I read, you know, Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States, and, you know, I was working on my anthropology degree where I kind of learned a lot of this stuff. And so a lot of the things that Howard and Lovecraft are referencing and that unfortunately have kind of made their way back into the public discourse, like almost mainstream public discourse, are these archaic remnants of, like old anthropology, which was way more concerned not with understanding culture or documenting different peoples and belief systems and things like that, but more of kind of propping up the Eurocentric, and not even Eurocentric, because I mean, as you could tell from, you know, Howard and Lovecraft's writings, they don't even like, you know, anybody who's not basically English, so like Anglocentric, you know, and anybody else who isn't that is, you know, some lesser subhuman kind of thing, according to their weird weird beliefs. But, you know, and the foundations of anthropology were a lot more concerned with that. And of course they're also, you know, they were into esotericism, they were into theology, stuff like that, the type of things that, you know, Hitler referenced in a lot of his own kind of occult leanings. It's a lot of the same literature, which it's just, you know, I mean, these conspiracy theories about Jews, they go back to the, you know, before the Crusades, the medieval times, when, you know, they were forced to be bankers because Christians couldn't do that religiously. and then they were kind of put in these positions because they were also discriminated against. I could go on. Obviously, there's a whole huge history behind all of these archaic things which have been around for hundreds of years, and they're just as stupid as they were back then, and they're just as stupid now, but they keep re-emerging. And I think these days, internet forums and things like that, they've allowed this kind of stuff, which wasn't maybe as known about or as mainstream as a lot of this discussion has become, to find a way back into public discourse. And the fact that you're hearing about this stuff on the news, the fact that you have QAnon, the fact that you have all this stuff going on that is influencing modern politics, modern politicians, you have these right-wing neo-Nazis. When I was a kid reading this story, I thought the Nazis were done, defeated, World War II. That was that. That was obviously a very childlike and ignorant, naive view of the world. A lot has changed since then, reading this again now in my 30s, in 2024.
Yeah, I don't think it's ignorant or naive. I think it's just optimistic, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think we're seeing a real correlation between the fact that the last surviving people who can remember fighting the Nazis are all dying out, and the people who are now, supposedly representing and supposedly respecting their memory are the same people who have fucking Help for Heroes tattoos are the same people who are rocking up and smashing up Shoe Zone or robbing Greg's. It's just baffling. And once the last of these people die and have the memory of the actual ramifications of these things coming to pass in real time, then the more likely things are to deteriorate again. But, that's easy to say from a safe, secure, white, middle-class perspective in England, because there are plenty of places around the world where that stuff's never gone away and they're still getting fucking murdered wholesale,
Very true.
My God. We usually have a laugh on this podcast, don't we? One thing, I've not even talked about beer. I brought myself a tailgate peanut butter milk stout. I'm just going to open that, but it really does make me yearn for the old days where all you could do was read an author's work and judge him by what's on the page. Because in recent years, particularly with stuff like Lovecraft and Howard and even Tolkien, you've got the multiple volume History of Middle-earth sets, which went into the far end of a fart into his letters and his original ideas about their epic works. We can do all that, but generally, back in those days, you read what was on the page and you judged the author by what was on the page. Well, today, you can see people's favourite authors unravel in real time on social media. And you can see it in the last few days, the levels of vitriol that have been flying around because of usually misinformed opinions about what's going on, for example, at the Olympics. Fucking hell. We're talking about a writer that was writing a century ago and took his own life almost 90 years ago. Meanwhile, people we know who are currently in their 30s are having to abandon their favourite childhood authors because they can't help but publicise weird, divisive opinions in a stream of consciousness because they can't stay off fucking Twitter for half a day.
Oh, my God.
Oh, for simpler times.
Could you imagine?
I'm sure a lot of authors we loved were absolute twats, but we didn't find out in real time when they were getting retweeted by Elon fucking Musk.
Oh, God. Can you imagine Lovecraft having a Twitter account today? Oh, my God.
It'd either be like fucking constant rants about transgenderism, or it would just have a cat account.
But the name of that cat account would be problematic. I don't know if he'd get that past the X community. Says, well, actually, no, he probably would, given what's going on there and what they allow now. So he probably would be completely fine with whatever horrible name he wanted to come up for his cat account.
Oh, I think Musk would definitely be retweeting anything that Lovecraft said.
Oh, God. Yeah. What a time.
Yeah.
The ancient evil has returned. Darkness falls upon the land yet again. Yeah.
Well, you know what? On that, first thing I'll say is this peanut butter milk stout is really nice. That makes a nice change.
There you go.
But you know what? Thanks, Dave, as ever, for dropping into Derry Toms to tell us what's going on with SÖNUS, and also to take an honest and raw look at some stories that we fucking love.
Yeah.
Despite the warts, which make us confused and not really know what to do with it.
Pus-riddled disgusting, foul warts that pop up from time to time as you're trying to enjoy this really, really cool otherwise piece. Yeah, I mean, for all those out there who, who I'm sure, revisiting these works, especially in the context of everything going on today, it can, I'm sure, be very difficult and disheartening. And I mean, there really isn't there really isn't a concrete one thing you can do. Basically, keep reading it if you can stand it, and if not, hey, I understand. Don't force yourself to. If you do read these things and you just feel like, I can't fucking stand to hear this fucking bullshit coming out of this long dead author, I mean, yeah, that's completely understandable. There's a lot going on in the world, and sometimes it's just more than you can take.
I think one of the positive things about all this stuff is there are enough people out there, and people of colour, who appreciate the artistic elements of, for example, Lovecraft's work, and have, to some degree, accepted and acknowledged the problematic elements, but still moved to, make that art their own. So you've got things like the Call of Cthulhu supplement, Harlem Unbound, which, despite the content of Red Hook,
horror at Red Hook, oh god,
horror at Red Hook, they've taken what they like from it and choose to live with or disregard or excise the things that are just not acceptable to them and shouldn't be acceptable to anybody these days. And I think that's really what you have to do. I mean, S.T. Joshi himself is a man of colour. But, he's taken it upon himself because he loves the content of these stories, to deeply dive into it and confront it all head on. And, I think we've done that despite the fact that it confuses and gives us mixed feelings about how much we should or shouldn't enjoy something. But, I think it's plain from our effusive comments about the contents of some of these stories just how much we enjoy them, even while we acknowledged I wouldn't want to have a lengthy conversation with this bloke.
No. I'll read his work. I'll cringe every now and again at a horrible phrase, and then I'll keep on going and enjoying it for what it is. And I mean, it's extremely enjoyable. There's so much amazing writing in all of these stories, and there's amazing concepts, which of course have gone on to inspire so many other things. But warts and all.
Before I read that this morning, one of the things I was going to say was me and Phil watched The Whole Wide World, which is a 90s film based upon the Novaline Price book, One Who Walked Alone. And she was a writer cum teacher who had a relationship with Howard up until just before his death, when she went to do a master's degree in the University of Louisiana, I think. And it's a really, really good film. It's a really effective film. Renée Zellweger plays Novaline Price, and Vincent D'Onofrio really does an incredible, intense turn as Howard. It's a really effective film. It's a tour de force from both the actors in terms of how they riff off each other. It's a really good film, and it's very, very heavy when it comes to the emotional impact. But yeah, reading some of those letters did add a slightly different context to my feelings about Howard as depicted by Vincent D'Onofrio. But there's one really wonderful bit in it quite early on in the film, and you can watch the whole film on YouTube, where she asks him to tell her about his character Conan, and it's Vincent D'Onofrio standing in front of a cornfield, almost physically acting out Conan and telling her about the Conan character as this like dramatic or like fantasy brass music swells behind him, and it only lasts for about 15 seconds, but it's so fucking intense. It gave me goosebumps.
Why don't you tell me about your character Conan?
Conan! Conan is the damnedest bastard there ever was. He's got a long black mane of hair, crystal blue eyes. He's a fighter, born on the battlefield. To him, combat's a way of life. It's all he's ever known, all he ever wants to know. He's no soldier who was taught to fight. To him, fight is an instinct. It's a part of him. Like his legs, his arms, his chest, his bull neck. Believe me, he don't take it from nobody. He'll fight man, beast, devil, or God. And when those women feel those tree trunk firm arms around their waist, they melt like butter on a hot skillet.
Absolutely incredible performance by D'Onofrio. Yeah, and a very good film. And a very sad film as well, because it follows through right up until when he killed himself at 30, when he knew his mother wasn't going to regain consciousness. It's a film, of course. It's a film adaptation, so there are some artistic liberties that are taken with the source material, and it's a film based upon one person's memories of Howard. But it's really the only contemporary account that exists of what he was like as a person. So, you know, it's an interesting book, and it's an interesting film, and quite an effective film as well. So well worth checking out. Checking out. Thank you, Dave, for attending Derry and Toms once again, and we'll reconvene at some point soon, where we'll be looking at the Rune Staff.
All right, looking forward to it.
Yeah, rock on. And also, I was very pleased to have got you into checking out a bit of Slade.
Slade is awesome.
Yeah.
They get my full approval. Badass.
And I've just agreed with Joe Banks that we're going to cover the Slade movie, Flame, in a couple of months' time.
Nice.
Yeah, so we're going to look at the film Flame, and we're also going to look at the novelisation, which I managed to pick up as well, which will be interesting. So, yeah. Right. See you soon.
Goodbye, everybody.
Massive thanks once again to Dave for joining me in what turned out to be a discussion, some of which we perhaps didn't quite predict. But as we know from the news every day at the moment, these things are ever present and all around us. But it's always good and healthy to bear our feelings on these things and just have a good dialogue about it. And I very much appreciate Dave's balanced and wise take on those issues. And thanks as always to our patrons for keeping this show on the road. First, those without tier: Anthony Piconti, Tim Cardos, Dave Dempster, and Sebastian Weetabix. And our chaos engineers: Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Spong, Andrew Van Ness, Anthony Porter, Benjamin Fletcher, Brandon Mays, Dan Charnley, Dave Griffiths, Dave Voxman, of course, Gabriel Laycock, Harvey Faulkner-Aston, Jim Kirkland, Jim Jupp, John W. Lays, Jules Lawrence, Mal Pertwee, Matt Saltz, Nick Hopkinson, Nelbert, Ofer Ziv, Paul McRandall, PJ Cooper, Scott Butler, and Simon Perrins. And our crafty Jugaderos: Alexander Harris, Christian Hundal, Eliel Westenra, Graham Holden, Liam Turner, Loz, Mark Taylor, Matthew Broom, Sean Twist, and Toby White. And eternal thanks to our patron demons: Alistair Davison, Andy Clark, Andy Darby, David Lee, Fred Quiche, Gareth Wilson, Glenn Sawyer, Greg Faulkner, Gwen Barlow, Ian Stead, Imria, Janie Stim, Jason Vogel, Joe Monty, Jonathan Sharp, Lee Gary, Mark Hebden, Marius Latauskas, Miles Reed-Labato, Neil Burton, Paul Hillary, Randall Gatlin, Steve Round, Tom Murphy, Tony Milazzo, the OG patron, Norman Beresford, and last, but of course never least, Robert McMillan. Okay, enough of my yakking. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram with the handle @BreakfastRuins. You can email us at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The webpage is breakfastintheruins.com. BITR Breakfast in the Ruins Radio is live on Radio Garden or via the web player at breakfastintheruinsradio.blogspot.com. We have our Patreon page too, and there are a few extra odds and sods on there. But for now, take care, stay safe, and we will meet again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.